The story begins in a dim forest where thin, twisted trees stand with trunks bent like bony fingers while dark mold and moss cover the ground. Dark leaves drift through the air beneath a cloudy, murky sky. This forest is filled with bizarre monsters that do not exist in reality. A purple monster lies over a young man and bites toward him while a knife is stabbed into the monster's neck and blood spills from the wound. The young man lies on the ground under the monster's jaws with saliva dripping over his face and says, "Damn it." The monster's huge mouth opens wide above the young man's head with rows of sharp teeth and its tongue hanging down toward him. Blood splashes through the air as he says, "If he dies here, everything ends." The young man jerks upright in a bed as he wakes from the dream. He grips his throat and breathes heavily and says 12 years have already passed since the pain began that feels like he is actually dying. He rests his cheek on his hand with tired eyes and says that damn dream again. Power lines stretch between poles above buildings under a bright daytime sky. He holds a pen and writes notes in a notebook while sketching a small monster figure on the page. He pushes his chair back and rises from the desk with one hand on the table and says he can't endure the pain of dying. He stands barefoot in the center of a cluttered room filled with books, papers, and equipment and stares ahead. He looks downward with exhausted eyes and says sleep is the most painful and that he is so damn tired. A monster bites into his neck as blood sprays across his shoulder while he says every time he falls asleep in reality, he is sent back to the nightmare world. A sword pierces his torso and blood bursts from the wound as he collapses backward while saying if he dies in the nightmare world, he is sent back to reality. He sits hunched on the bed clutching his stomach and breathing heavily because he cannot get a proper night's sleep. He glares forward with tired eyes and says, "Fuck." He crouches in tall grass wearing a hood and gripping a sword after spending 12 years mastering weaponry, martial arts, swordsmanship, jungle survival, and military tactics to stop dying in the nightmare world. He moves through the grass with his sword held low and his cloak trailing behind him as he looks back startled. He drives his sword downward into a monster's head and blood sprays from the impact while saying because of his training he now dies less often in the nightmares. He stands in his room with one hand pressed to his temple beneath shelves filled with books and boxes. He presses his fingers against the side of his head and says the fundamental problem is sleep. A doctor sits behind a desk with her hands folded and says to try to find something he wants to do, and then he might be able to get a good night's sleep. He stares forward with tense eyes and says, "Something I want to do." He stands in the middle of a cluttered room facing tall shelves filled with books and boxes and says the only thing he wants to do is just fall asleep. He tilts his head slightly upward with his eyes closed and says he just wants to sleep soundly even if just once. Blood drips from his nose and mouth. Blood pours from his mouth as he grips his throat and says, "Ah." His eye stares forward in shock as he says, "What is this?" He falls to the floor and lies face down in a large pool of blood. He lies on the floor with his cheek pressed into the blood while it smears across his mouth and chin, and he says his body feels light and the persistent headache is gone. A wide open meadow stretches under a bright blue sky and fresh air fills his chest and head, and for the first time in 12 years he feels like he actually slept well. An eye-shaped opening shows treetops and sky as he wonders if he actually died. The view through the opening shows trees and cloudy sky as he wonders what this place is. The protagonist sits leaning against the massive roots of a large tree in a misty forest. He stares upward with wide eyes and realizes this is the nightmare world he suffered in for 12 years. He suddenly turns his head with a startled expression. A large reptilian monster with multiple eyes sticks out its long tongue behind the tree while the hooded man presses his hands against the sides of his hood. The multi-eyed reptilian monster opens its mouth with its tongue hanging out as it stares forward. The protagonist presses his shoulder against the tree and looks to the side while realizing he lost a large amount of blood. His body lies on the floor with his cheek pressed into a pool of blood, and he realizes he might really be dead. The protagonist sits on the thick roots of the giant tree and lowers his head. He stands in front of the massive roots and accepts that if he dies here, there is no reality to return to. He stares forward with wide eyes and declares that this place is now his reality. Reptilian monsters stand near the tree looking sideways while he remains above on the roots and says he knows what kind of place this is and what he must do to survive. The protagonist narrows one eye beneath his hood and decides he should not fight right now and instead head toward a bright place that monsters hate. He lowers his chin slightly beneath the hood and stays silent. He pulls a large curved sword from his waist and a sharp metallic sound rings out as he questions the strange feeling in his body. The protagonist suddenly leaps forward with the sword raised and declares he does not want to run away while the reptilian monster looks up with wide eyes. He stands holding the sword at his side and wonders if the strange feeling comes from sleeping deeply for the first time in ages or from this younger body. A large reptilian monster charges across the ground toward him while he stands facing it with the sword ready. The monster's multi-eyed head rushes forward with its jaws wide open and saliva flying. He tightens both hands around the sword hilt as his body screams at him. The protagonist lowers his head beneath the hood with a sharp glare and declares that he will fight and survive. His blade slices across the reptilian monster's body and tears through flesh as blood sprays outward. The protagonist looks back over his shoulder as blood splashes across his cloak and face. The monster's clawed foot slams into the ground and dirt and debris burst outward. The monster's body jerks backward as blood pours from the deep wound across its torso. The monster collapses backward while he stands holding the sword at his side with blood dripping from the blade. Several bright pillars of light descend from the sky. The protagonist kneels with his sword planted into the monster while another monster's head lies in the foreground. His blade cuts into the monster's stomach as he reaches inside to pull out its core. He holds a glowing monster core in his gloved hand and looks down at it with a calm expression. The protagonist raises the core to his mouth. He bites into the core as blue liquid bursts into his mouth and blood runs from his lips. He stands with his sword at his side in the forest, while a dead reptilian monster lies in the foreground. Blood covers his mouth and chin as his red eye glows, and he declares that in this dark fantasy world he will survive no matter what. The protagonist walks through the forest between massive tree roots. Sunlight pours through the forest canopy as bright beams of light reach the ground. The protagonist stares forward with a serious expression and says first to a brighter place. He sits calmly on a thick tree branch with his sword resting across his shoulder as sunlight filters through the leaves. Leaves drift slowly through the air as the forest sways in the breeze. The protagonist closes his eyes for a moment. A faint smile appears on his lips. He stretches his arm with a relaxed grin and remarks that it is another night of perfect sleep. Leaves continue drifting across the sky. The protagonist swings his curved blade through hanging vines while saying it has been a month since he crossed over here. He looks forward beneath his hood and explains that even though he continues moving from the pitch-black darkness toward the light, just because he feels like fighting now does not mean he goes hunting. He reflects that risking his life for fun is madness as a bat-like monster feeds on a corpse in the forest. The protagonist watches from behind a large tree and admits he cannot help feeling the urge to fight. He lowers his voice and says the only time he hunts is when he needs food, then realizes he is getting hungry. In a flash of motion, he swings his curved blade and slices through the monster. A glowing blue core sits inside the monster's body as he says another reason to hunt is to obtain new power. The protagonist bites into the blue core as liquid spills from it. He wipes his mouth and explains that eating these gives him a chance to gain the monster's power. He sits quietly against a tree and thinks that ever since he started eating them, adapting to this place has become easier. He reaches toward his belt and recalls another fact he discovered. The protagonist pulls out a metal token and realizes this body seems to belong to someone with the status of a third-class mercenary, and he notices he can read the writing engraved on it. The token hangs from a cord as the words third-class mercenary echo in his mind. His eyes widen in a close view. He sits beside a tree looking forward as he realizes that the existence of a token like this means people must be living somewhere in this world. Sunlight pours through the trees ahead and he exclaims that he can see the light. His expression changes as he suddenly notices something unusual. The protagonist looks down at the ground in surprise and asks what that is as a line of sharp metal spikes lies hidden in the grass. A metal bear trap with jagged teeth lies open on the ground, and he exclaims that it is a trap. He turns his head with a tense expression and says that means something. The protagonist leaps forward through the forest with his cloak trailing behind him and says there might be people nearby. Bright sunlight shines through the trees ahead. He stands in the clearing and looks down toward a small wooden house. His eyes widen as he looks forward and says it is a house. The protagonist raises his fist and knocks on the wooden door, then opens it while asking if anyone is there and if no one is home. He stands inside the house and looks toward a table where a book rests. He reaches out with his gloved hand and places it on top of the book, saying this is something. The protagonist holds the open book with both hands and looks down at its pages, saying it is called Demonic Realm Chronicles. His eye widens and a drop of sweat appears on his face as he stares at the book in shock. He leans forward while holding the open book and says the history of this place and the terms used are recorded quite meticulously. The protagonist stares ahead with a serious expression and says that for him to survive in this world, this book is absolutely necessary. A boot suddenly presses against the wooden floor with a sharp sound. An older man appears from behind with a crossbow aimed at him and asks who he is. The older man keeps the crossbow aimed forward and says to answer clearly or he will put a hole in his head. He looks to the side with a faint smile and says he is glad to see a person, but wonders if the man mistakes him for a robber. The protagonist raises his gloved hand toward the older man while the crossbow remains aimed at him and says not to misunderstand, explaining that he entered the remote house out of curiosity. The older man glares forward and tells him to get lost, saying he has no business with him. The protagonist stands beside the table with the book lying in front of him and says he understands. His gloved hand presses down on the cover of the book as he speaks. The protagonist holds the book in both hands and asks if the man could lend it to him because he wants to read it, adding that he will pay a price if needed. The older man narrows his eyes and asks what if he refuses. The protagonist looks forward with a tense expression and says he absolutely needs this book to survive here. He pulls a dagger from his waist as his cloak shifts and says in that case. He stares forward with glowing red eyes and says he might just become a robber. The protagonist holds the dagger in a tight grip while facing the old man who keeps the crossbow aimed at him. The old man aims the crossbow straight ahead with a steady gaze. The protagonist narrows his glowing eye and says he does not know how strong the old man is, but he does not feel like he would lose. The old man's mustache shifts slightly as his expression softens. He stands in the doorway with the crossbow lowered at his side and says a robber would not talk about wanting to read a book. He introduces himself as Hector. The protagonist looks forward with a sharp expression and says the man lowered his guard while introducing himself as Kim Woojin. Hector rests the crossbow on his shoulder and strokes his beard while saying Gi Mujai is quite a peculiar name. Jin stands nearby and asks him to just call him Jin. Jin looks to the side with a tense expression and a drop of sweat on his cheek and says his name must be hard to pronounce. A gloved hand holds the thick book while Hector says he understands, but the book is precious to him and cannot be lent out. He says Jin can stay here for a while and read it. Hector leans forward and gestures with his hand while saying he wants Jin to help with simple chores in return. Jin holds the book to his chest and thanks him. A small wooden house sits quietly behind a fence while mist drifts through the trees around it. A pot of soup boils over a small fire as pieces of vegetables float in the broth, and Jin ends up staying at Hector's house. Hector is gruff but does not seem like a bad person. Hector sits at the table eating from a bowl and tells Jin to eat up. Jin sits at the table holding a bowl and spoon while staring at the warm soup and says it has been a long time since he had something warm to eat. Jin lifts a spoonful of soup to his mouth and eats while tears run down his cheek. He says it is delicious and that Hector might be an angel. When the sun rises, Hector goes out hunting. Jin sits at the table holding a mug and asks if Hector is going out today too, and Hector says it might take a while. Hector looks ahead with a stern expression and says he is going to take revenge on the monster that killed his comrades. Jin holds his bowl and looks down with a serious expression and says Hector looks strong, so seeing him nervous means the enemy must be powerful. Jin looks toward the open doorway while holding the bowl and says it must be a considerably powerful monster. Hector walks away from the house with a crossbow and gear strapped to his back. When Jin is alone, he sits at the table and reads the chronicles. All stories begin with the Northern Empire as a great castle burns on a cliff while soldiers stand below with raised spears. The king of the Northern Empire, blinded by greed, reaches toward a glowing otherworldly gate. The king opens the otherworldly gate said to hold the truth of all creation and immense power as red light pours out over him. On that day the calamity begins as countless glowing eyes appear within a dark opening. Powerful monsters pour out from the otherworldly gate and spread across the land, turning the north into a demonic realm in 9 years. Humanity unites many factions to form the Order Alliance, and the alliance builds a barrier to stop the spread of the demonic realm. Jin closes the book resting on the table with his hand. He rests his chin on his hand and murmurs in thought that there is a lot of useful information, but something still bothers him. Jin sits at the table with his hand on the book and says the deeper you go into the demonic realm, the stronger the monsters become. He wonders if the monsters became weaker as he moved toward the light. Hector runs across the grass with a crossbow in his hands as wind trails behind him. Jin rests his hand against his mouth and looks forward with a serious expression while wondering how deep inside the demonic realm he had been wandering. Hector runs forward with wind whipping around him as he moves at high speed, while Jin wonders how strong he is in this place. Several wolf-like monsters charge forward through the forest, while a large white wolf with glowing red eyes lunges ahead of the pack. Hector lowers his body while gripping the crossbow as he rushes forward. A massive white wolf leaps through the air with its jaws open. Hector's boot slams against the ground as he braces himself. Hector spreads his stance and fires multiple bolts from the crossbow as arrows shoot downward toward the monsters. Several bolts strike the charging wolves as one beast is knocked aside, while another continues rushing forward. A wolf with glowing red eyes lunges forward as a bolt breaks in half in front of it. Hector turns with a tense expression and shouts in frustration. Hector runs toward the house while Jin comes out holding a weapon. Jin walks forward holding a large blade in one hand while one of his eyes glows red. Hector runs toward Jin holding the crossbow and shouts for him to run because it is dangerous here. Jin rushes forward with his blade raised as he passes Hector. Hector looks back with wide eyes and sweat on his face. Jin's red eye glows as wind streaks past his face while he rushes forward through the air. He leaps from the ground with a sharp impact. Jin descends from above with the blade raised while a massive white wolf looks up at him. The white wolf rears back with its jaws open and claws raised. Jin drives the blade straight down into the wolf's body as blood bursts outward. The blade splits through the wolf as Jin continues the downward strike. The wolf's body crashes onto the ground while several beasts stand behind it. A large brown wolf lowers its head and bares its teeth while growling. Hector stares forward with wide eyes and sweat on his face and says, "Oh my God." Jin stands with his blade extended to the side as blood arcs through the air, and Hector says he took down the werewolf in a single slash. The massive werewolf lies split open on the ground with blood spreading beneath its body. Hector stares at him in shock while gripping the crossbow as Jin calls out Hector's name. Jin looks down with blood on his cheek and asks if this monster is considered strong. Hector faces him and asks if he is asking whether a werewolf is strong. Hector narrows his eyes and answers that it is incredibly strong. Jin looks ahead with a calm, sharp gaze and says, "I see." Jin stands facing the pack of wolves with his blade lowered at his side and says he will hear the details after dealing with the rest. Several wolves stand in the forest with their teeth bared. Jin grips his blade and narrows his glowing eyes as he says they do not look that strong and there are about 40 of them, just enough to screw him over if he is careless. Jin lowers his stance and aims his blade toward the pack as he says instead of fighting all of them, he will slice the throat of the one that looks like the second in command and shatter their morale. Jin's eyes narrow sharply. A massive brown wolf with glowing blue eyes stands at the very front of the pack as Jin identifies it as the target. Jin looks forward with red energy flaring behind him and raises the blade overhead as he says it is the first one he needs to kill. The brown wolf snarls and bares its teeth. Jin's red eye narrows sharply as he focuses on the large brown wolf. The brown wolf senses the killing intent and stares back silently as its expression tightens. Suddenly the wolf's eyes widen in alarm. The brown wolf turns its head while a gray wolf beside it looks confused. The brown wolf suddenly turns and runs back while the gray wolves stare at it in confusion. The brown wolf yelps loudly in shock. A powerful gust of wind spirals through the clearing and scatters leaves as the wolves freeze in fear. Jin stands with his sword while the wolves panic and scatter, running away from him. Hector stares in disbelief and says the wolves ran away, those wolves that are known for their bravery. Jin stands calmly with a thoughtful expression and notes that the wolf sure knows how to assess a situation. The large brown wolf sprints away through the forest. A worn wooden building stands under a dark, stormy sky. Inside the house, the body of the werewolf lies stretched across a table, while Hector explains that the bounty on the werewolf Jin killed is at least 40 gold coins. Jin touches the corpse and asks if that is a lot of money. Hector answers that it certainly is. Jin looks surprised for a moment as Hector adds that it is enough to live comfortably without working for 6 to 7 years. Jin looks again at the werewolf and questions why such a weak monster would have such a high bounty. He continues thinking that if a trash monster like a werewolf has such a huge bounty. A small smile forms on his face. Jin's lips curl into a faint smile as he thinks that whenever he needs money he can simply hunt and kill monsters like this. He reflects that life here might be easier than the last 12 years. Hector places a small pouch of coins, bundled jerky, and a folded map on top of the werewolf's fur-covered body. Jin sits beside the corpse and looks at the items as he says this is a werewolf pelt, while Hector stands nearby holding the map. Hector rests his hands on the werewolf's body and tells Jin to take the map, go to Pioneer Village, and find Jacob at the marked location. The pouch of coins drops onto the werewolf pelt as Jin looks at it and asks if it is okay for Hector to give him something this valuable. Hector looks down toward Jin and says he killed the werewolf, so he is simply paying the price and that he also had a grudge against that creature. Hector extends his hand forward. Hector reaches out toward Jin and thanks him for getting revenge for him, adding that he hopes they meet again if the opportunity arises. Their hands clasp firmly together. Jin grips Hector's hand and thanks him for everything. A small wooden house stands quietly at the edge of the forest. Jin walks away from the house carrying the rolled pelt and a sack over his shoulder, while Hector stands watching from the doorway. Jin walks down a forest path with the large bundle of pelts strapped to his back and the sack hanging from his shoulder. He turns his head slightly as he walks while a creature stands on top of a rock in the distance. A large beast with long curved horn-like appendages stands on the rock with its head raised. The beast raises its head and lets out a low growl while its blue eye glows. Jin walks toward a large wooden gate where armed guards stand watch as he arrives at Pioneer Village. Jin looks ahead at the settlement and says this is Pioneer Village. Jin stands at the open gate with the rolled pelt strapped to his back while a guard holding a spear faces him, and he notes that the town is quite well stocked for a small place. Jin walks through the village street carrying his bundle while several townspeople turn their heads and stare at him. Jin glances sideways while a group of men behind him watch him closely. Jin walks past a muscular bald man with crossed arms while he thinks that everyone seems on high alert because he is a stranger they have not seen before. People stand along the street watching as Jin walks away with the large pelt on his back, and it becomes clear that in a world like this the thing more dangerous than monsters can be people. A wooden tavern sign with a mug and fork hangs above the entrance. Jin walks into the tavern carrying the rolled pelt and sack, while patrons sit at tables drinking and playing cards, and a waitress carries a tray of mugs. Jin walks past the tables while several men glance toward him. Jin sets the large rolled pelt and the sack onto the counter as the bartender looks at him and offers him a beer. Jin looks at the bartender and says he will pass on the drink and instead asks if he knows where he can find a man named Jacob. A man sitting at the counter turns toward him. The man holds a knife and a piece of food and says he is Jacob and asks what he can do for him, while Jin thinks this guy is Jacob and says he has the face of a scammer. Jin turns slightly and says he was sent by Hector, explaining that Hector told him he could sell a werewolf pelt if he met him. Jacob jerks backward in shock as the knife slips from his hand, while Jin presses his hand against the rolled pelt on the table. and Jacob shouts in surprise and asks if Hector killed a werewolf. Jacob grabs the large rolled pelt and pulls it closer while Jin watches him, and Jin notes that Jacob assumes Hector killed the werewolf and decides there is no need to correct him. Jacob stares down at the werewolf pelt draped over the table with wide eyes and says it is a real werewolf pelt. Several men stand nearby watching as Jacob holds the pelt while one man says Hector may have finally done it and adds that even if he is old, Hector is still Hector. Jacob's mouth curls into a grin as he murmurs that this is as expected. Jacob bares his teeth with a fierce grin and says he knew Hector could pull it off. Several men crowd around Jin while one man grips a knife and another clenches his fists, and Jin stiffens in reaction. Jin turns his head sharply toward them and asks what they are doing. Jacob pulls the werewolf pelt over his head like a hood and raises a clawed paw toward Jin while telling him to get lost while he is asking nicely and says he will spare his life. Jin looks toward Jacob and calls him a scammer while asking if he has always done business with this intention when Hector trusted him. Jacob tilts his head with a smirk beneath the werewolf pelt and tells Jin to watch his mouth, saying Hector lived too far away and supplying him caused a loss. Jacob lifts the werewolf paw over his shoulder and grins while saying he needs the pelt to make up for the losses he accumulated. Jin stares forward with a cold expression as his eye glows red, and he questions whether he should kill him before deciding he should not. A hand rests on the table as he says he cannot kill a person over a pelt and calls the man a shitty bastard. Beer splashes across Jin's face as Jacob throws the drink at him. Jacob holds the empty mug beside his face and smirks while telling Jin not to try to be clever and to get lost. Jin sits with his back turned as drops of beer run down his hair and cloak while he remains silent. Jin walks away from the counter while Jacob stands behind him holding the empty mug and the sack rests on the counter. A mug tumbles across the floor leaving a trail of spilled beer as several armed men stand around Jin with knives and tense stances. Jacob smirks while holding the sack on his shoulder and tells Jin it was a smart choice. Jacob's expression tightens as he notices something and lets out a confused sound. Jin grabs a large wooden table and flips it upward as the furniture lifts into the air. Jin stands with his back toward the room and calls out to Jacob. Jin turns his head with a red glowing eye and says that if someone intended to scam from the start, they should have aimed for the neck instead of the back. Jacob's eyes widen beneath the werewolf hood as he exhales sharply and says he takes back what he said about Jin being smart. Several armed men rush forward with weapons raised while Jacob watches from behind and says the kid does not know the value of his life. A man lunges forward swinging a large blade down toward Jin while shouting for him to die. Jin bursts forward with his cloak whipping around him as his eyes glow red, and he says that people like them probably would not make him feel guilty even if he killed them. A man swings his blade downward and Jin ducks low beneath the strike as the weapon slams past him. The attacker grips his sword with both hands and shouts that Jin is strong and fast. Jin lowers his gaze with a cold expression. Jin slashes through the attackers as blood sprays across the floor, and one man collapses backward while another leaps toward him. A bald man raises a heavy weapon above his head and swings it down toward Jin. The weapon slams into the floor with a violent impact as debris bursts upward while Jin stands beside him unharmed. Jin drives his shoulder into the edge of a wooden table and pushes it forward. The table crashes into the bald attacker and knocks him backward. The bald man recoils behind the overturned table and mutters in alarm. A blade slices downward through the air toward Jin. Jin lunges forward and slashes upward with his sword as blood sprays across the floor. Jin stands still with blood streaked across his face while his red eyes stare forward. Jacob stares forward with wide eyes as sweat pours down his face, and mutters in shock while wondering where such a monster appeared from. Jin crouches among broken furniture and fallen bodies as multiple attackers rush toward him with raised weapons while Jacob thinks a fighter this strong should be known in this area, and that at this rate he will die for nothing. An attacker leaps through the air with two blades raised, while another swings a fist toward Jin as Jin twists low between them and cuts the leaping attacker in half. Jin slams his elbow into a man's side as the attacker's body jerks from the impact. Jin drives his fist straight into another man's stomach as blood bursts from the wound. A blade sweeps across the air. Jin slices across a bald attacker's torso as blood sprays along the arc of his sword. Jin stands over a fallen man with glowing red eyes while the defeated attacker lies motionless on the floor. Jin with a bloodied cheek stares forward with one glowing red eye while his face remains tense and motionless. Jacob with a terrified expression shouts that everyone should run. Two men inside a wooden house sprint toward the door while one looks back in alarm. A man crashes through the wooden wall and flies outward as broken boards and glass scatter through the air. Jacob lies on the ground staring ahead in shock with his body pressed against the dirt. His eyes widen in fear as he stares forward and shouts in shock. A large red wolf with glowing blue eyes stands with its jaws open and teeth bared as he shouts that it is a red wolf and asks why this monster is in the village. Jin lands behind Jacob with a sword raised while Jacob lifts both hands in panic. The red wolf faces Jin while several villagers recoil behind him with their hands raised in fear. Jin stares at the wolf with a questioning expression. The wolf bares its teeth and barks loudly as saliva flies from its mouth. Jin looks toward the wolf and says that it is the scout wolf while the wolf with glowing blue eyes faces him tense and silent. Jin's red eye glows as he stares at the wolf and asks if it came here because it wants to die too. The wolf freezes with its eyes wide and its face stiff. The wolf drops onto the ground, curls its body, and lets out a weak whimper. The wolf flips onto its back while panting repeatedly as it lies on the ground in front of Jin. The red wolf rolls on its back in front of Jin while panting heavily and kicking its legs in the air. 3 attackers stare at the wolf in confusion while pointing at it with shocked expressions. Jin looks down at the wolf with a puzzled expression and wonders why it is acting like a mutt. The wolf stares upward with wide eyes, sweating and panting with its tongue hanging out. Jin points his finger toward the 3 attackers as they look startled while the wolf lies on the ground nearby. Jin points directly at the wolf and orders it to bite. The wolf shoots upright with glowing eyes. The wolf lunges forward with its jaws wide open toward an attacker as the man throws up his arms in panic. The wolf slams into the villager and crushes him against the ground as he screams in pain. Blood bursts into the air as the wolf mauls him violently. Jin watches the attack and says, "Oh nice." Jacob staggers backward while staring at the wolf. The wolf bites into a fallen man on the ground while another body lies beside them. Jacob sweats and stares forward in panic as he says he needs to get out of this situation first. Jin glances forward calmly and Jacob says he is a moron. Jacob drops to his knees and bows deeply with both hands raised, saying he will apologize as many times as needed and begging to be spared, while promising he will do anything he is told. Sweating, Jacob lowers his head with clenched teeth and says revenge will come after this. Jin's sword drives straight down into the ground beside Jacob's hand. Jacob jerks his head up with wide eyes as blood runs down his forehead. Jin leans forward with both hands resting on the sword's handle while the kneeling Jacob looks up at him and says, "Sir." Jin covers his mouth with his gloved hand and mutters that this bastard thinks he is a pushover. Jin stares down with glowing red eyes and says he is not someone to be taken lightly. In a small office room, a smiling man sits across the table and says he is sorry and asks to let it slide this once. Jin sits across from him at the table while the factory manager tells him the company's situation when he asked about his missing salary. Jin sits in the office with a forced smile and says that back then, because he was soft-hearted, he had no choice but to accept the situation. A calendar's pages tear away as the dates change while he says that once he knelt down, the salary that was a week late was delayed by a month, then 2, and at some point. Jin opens the door and raises a hand, saying his salary this month is also late while the factory manager swings a golf club. The manager rests the golf club on his shoulder and calls him a punk. The manager shouts that people should stick together when things are tough and calls young people selfish while Jin says he branded him as selfish and treated him like a pushover. Jin stands beside his planted sword while the kneeling Jacob stares up at him and he says living month to month felt miserable. Jin turns away from the kneeling Jacob while saying he learned one lesson back then. The injured Jacob slowly lifts his head with a tense grin. Jacob curls his lips into a twisted grin. He suddenly lunges forward and grabs the dagger from his waist. He leaps into the air behind Jin with the dagger raised and screams for him to die. Jin turns his head with glowing red eyes and swings his hand upward. Jacob brings his blade down as Jin blocks the strike with his hand. Jin glares forward with his sword raised and says people like him who scam others do not know the meaning of remorse. Jacob's face freezes in terror as he realizes what is about to happen. Jin's sword flashes across and cuts off his head as blood sprays into the air. Jacob's severed head spins through the air as blood sprays outward while Jin stands below with his cloak swirling around him. Jin lowers his head with glowing red eyes as blood stains his cloak and says this time he will never be taken for a pushover again. Jin stands over the fallen body while blood splashes through the air. Jin turns his head slightly and says, "Now then." A large wolf stands in front of him with a small pouch hanging from its mouth as he says next, "Is that mutt?" and asks what he should do with him. The wolf lowers its head and drops the pouch on the ground in front of him as he says it seems the wolf has decided to follow him for now. The pouch lies open on the ground, revealing several gold coins inside. Jin slides his sword back into its sheath and looks down. Jin stands facing the horned wolf and asks, "You want to tag along?" The wolf looks up at him in silence. Jin bends forward and places his hand on the wolf's head. His gloved fingers rub the wolf's head as the animal closes its eyes. Jin looks down at the wolf with a faint smile. He pats the wolf's head and says, "Clever thing." Jin stands beside the large wolf and strokes its head while saying, "Let's get along from now on, mutt." Rows of rooftops stretch across a settlement beneath a large fortified wall and wooden watchtower. Soft light spreads across the sky above drifting clouds. Jin sits up in bed inside a room while the horned wolf lies asleep on the floor beside an empty bowl. A faint smile forms on Jin's lips as he says it was a perfect deep sleep. The wolf stretches and yawns widely while Jin raises his hand beside the bed and says the morning feels so refreshing he feels like he could fly. Jin sits shirtless on a wooden stool beside a stream washing his clothes in a large basin while water flows nearby. Water drips from Jin's arm as he wipes his face and exhales. He sits on the stool with wet clothes resting on the basin as he says he killed a person for the first time, and it was not just one or two but many. Jin sits with his head lowered and stares at his hands and says however he does not feel any guilt. Water drips down his face as he lowers his head and says because they were scum, No, the emotion he felt back then. Killing people feels the same to him as hunting monsters, and the moment fills him with excitement as he swings his blade with a grin. He presses his hand against his chest as a quiet buzzing vibration runs through his body. Jin lowers his head and studies his open hand while realizing something inside him is beginning to change. His red eyes glow faintly as he wonders if he might be cursed, but accepts that he survived. Jin walks through the forest with the large wolf beside him as he says his life in this world will be completely different and that he will live in abundance instead of a meaningless life. A calm smile forms under his hood as he decides to simply enjoy the present. He approaches the massive walls of the 5th Pioneer City with the wolf following behind and says they should sell the pelt first. Jin walks along the path and rubs his temple while telling the wolf to stay nearby and keep out of sight. He walks through the busy street of Pioneer City carrying a large rolled pelt over his shoulder as he heads toward the Order Alliance to claim a monster bounty. He glances to the side while recalling that the chronicles mention a branch of the Order Alliance in Pioneer City. A tall stone tower rises above the Order Alliance building as a clerk stretches and yawns behind the balcony desk. Jin stands at the counter with the rolled pelt on his back and asks if this place is the Order Alliance, and the clerk replies that it is and asks what brings him there today. Jin drops the large rolled pelt onto the desk in front of the clerk, making him flinch in surprise. Jin faces the clerk and says he came to collect a monster bounty. The clerk grips the pelt and inspects it with a doubtful look and says it is just dog skin and this is not a place for pranks. The clerk's eyes widen as he leans closer to the pelt and suddenly tells him to wait. He grabs the pelt and shouts that it is a werewolf pelt while Jin stands beside the counter watching calmly. Sweat runs down the clerk's face as he stares at the pelt and asks if Jin caught it himself. Jin looks at him and replies that he did earlier. Jin sits alone at a long wooden table inside a large room. A man enters through the door carrying a pouch and apologizes for the wait, explaining they needed time to confirm the pelt was real. A hand sets a heavy coin pouch on the table as the werewolf pelt is confirmed authentic and the reward is given. Jin holds the pouch with both hands and realizes the money is enough to live lazily for at least 6 or 7 years. He opens the pouch and stares at the pile of gold coins in his hands as a trembling runs through him that feels different from when he hunts. A smile spreads across his face while coins spill across his palm as he realizes money is definitely a good thing. He turns his head toward a voice calling out and answers with a questioning look. The man stands in front of him and asks if he would be interested in taking another request because he has a favor to ask. Jin leans forward with a faint grin and repeats, "A request." The man scratches the back of his head and explains that a monster recently appeared at a nearby quarry and it is causing serious trouble. Inside the quarry tunnel, 2 workers hesitate at the entrance as red glowing eyes stare from the darkness while it is said the quarry has become dangerous because of monsters, preventing bloodstone mining and pushing the city to the brink of ruin. A miner lies on the ground while another man grips a liquor bottle as it is said the monster there is stronger than a werewolf. The man gestures toward Jin and says he believes Jin can handle the job. Jin looks at him and asks what kind of monster it is. A monstrous skull-like creature with glowing red eyes appears in the man's description as he says its name is Mad Skull and that it carries a bounty of 70 gold coins. Jin turns his head slightly as he recalls reading about Mad Skull in the chronicles. A huge skull-faced monster looms over Jin as he faces it with his sword drawn, remembering that it is a creature he has already fought before. Mad Skull has a hardened skull and burning red eyes. The creature's glowing eye glares from the darkness as it shows insane aggression and strength far beyond a werewolf. Jin's eye widens as he remembers that it took him a month to kill the monster the first time because he died about 28 times. The man gestures across the table and asks Jin if he thinks he can subdue the monster. Jin tilts his head slightly and stays silent. His eyes glow red as he smiles and answers, "Of course." The quarry spreads out beneath tall rocky cliffs with mining structures and a dark tunnel at its center. Jin walks along the stone path overlooking the quarry and says the workers could not operate for a while because of Mad Skull. He stands at the quarry entrance and looks toward the dark mine, deciding it is best to finish the job as quickly as possible. Jin walks into the quarry while a man standing nearby calls out for him to wait. A group of men stands ahead of Jin, and one raises his hands while telling him they arrived first and were just preparing for battle, asking him to wait his turn. Jin turns back toward the group and thinks about their demand, that they want him to leave simply because they arrived first, and wonders since when hunting monsters required waiting in line. The red-haired mercenary awkwardly laughs and suggests another option. Jonathan spreads his arms wide in front of Jin and says they could join his team and hunt together. Jin stands still and looks to the side while thinking that if he waits for the mercenary group to finish and they succeed it will be a huge waste of time. Jonathan smiles confidently and gives a thumbs up while saying it might be better to work together. Sweat runs down the face of Jacob standing behind Jin. Jin grips the handle of his sword and says he cannot easily trust the people here, asking why he wants to bring him along when he already has plenty of people. Jonathan scratches the back of his head with an embarrassed smile and says he prioritizes safety over performance. Jonathan faces forward with a calm smile and says it would be a big help if Jin joined them because he seems strong. Jin turns his head slightly and asks why Jonathan suspects that he is strong. Jonathan stands facing Jin and explains that the wolf would not be following him if he were not strong. A blonde woman kneels and holds the wolf's head as it licks her cheek, while she says wolf monsters are known for strong independence, and it is amazing to see one following a human. Jin stares forward with widened eyes and thinks that he told Mutt to stay hidden. The wolf lowers its head and eats a roasted piece of meat from the ground while the blonde woman kneels beside it and smiles as he says they offered him meat, cuisine of this world that even he has not tasted yet. The wolf holds the roasted meat in its mouth and stares forward silently. The roasted meat with a bone rolls across the ground. The wolf crouches while Jin and Jonathan stand looking as a roasted piece of meat drops onto the ground between them. Jin glares forward with a tense expression and thinks about the wolf's behavior. A roasted piece of meat lies on the ground glistening with grease. Sweat runs down Jin's face as he murmurs in confusion. Jin leans forward and looks down at the meat near his foot while questioning why his body is reacting and says that when he thinks about it, he cannot remember the last time he had a real meat dish. Jin widens his eye in realization and thinks that a dog had been eating that meat and it was also on the ground. A hand reaches down and presses into the roasted meat on the ground. The blonde woman smiles and holds the roasted meat out toward Jin while asking if he would like some if he is hungry. Jin stares forward with widened eyes and murmurs softly. The blonde woman stands smiling while holding the roasted meat with both hands as glowing light surrounds her, and he sees her as a goddess he can trust. Lamps hang along the rocky tunnel walls illuminating the mine interior. Several people walk deeper into the mine tunnel past wooden carts while Jin, the blonde woman, and Jonathan follow behind. Jin holds a piece of roasted meat and eats it while thinking that it tastes delicious. Claire turns her head back toward Jin while walking and says they have not introduced themselves yet. Jonathan points his thumb toward himself and introduces himself as Jonathan, captain of the Black Marlin mercenary group, while the blonde woman says her name is Claire. Jin stands behind them and says he is Kim Woojai but corrects himself and says he is Jin, and Jonathan replies that they are pleased to have him and tells him to ask questions anytime, while Jin answers that he understands. Jonathan smiles slightly as he reacts with surprise and says they have arrived, explaining that this is where they will fight Mad Skull. Inside a large circular cavern, mercenaries spread out along the edge while Jonathan orders the trap team to set up nets and the spear team to move to their assigned positions. Jonathan walks forward with his hand behind his head and asks Claire if they should begin, and Claire answers yes. Jin stares upward with widened eyes as glowing feathers drift around him. Claire floats in the air while holding an open book as green magical light and feathers swirl around her, and Jin wonders if this is magic. Claire points toward a glowing magic circle forming above the open book as Jin realizes this is the magic mentioned in the chronicles. Claire closes her eyes and chants that she asks in her name to send blessings upon this land. Jonathan strides forward with a confident smile as green magical energy and floating feathers swirl around him and Feather Step activates. He looks ahead with a grin and says Claire's buffs are excellent as always. Jonathan runs forward with his arms raised while green energy trails around him, and Claire tells him he has 3 minutes at best and 5 at worst. His boot lands on the ground as swirling green energy surrounds his step, and he tells everyone to stay ready. Jonathan sprints forward with his arms stretched ahead as the green aura trails behind him, shouting that he will lure Mad Skull there. Jin smiles slightly while watching Jonathan move faster and realizes magic is pretty cool. Claire looks forward calmly as white feathers drift around her while Jin wonders if he could use magic too if he learned. A mercenary grips a spear and shouts that there is no time to dawdle because Mad Skull will be there soon. A voice warns that if even one person makes a mistake, they could all die as Jonathan runs along the edge of the cavern while nets stretch across the pit, and someone shouts for everyone to stay sharp. Jin grips a spear and looks ahead while thinking that driving the monster into a trap and pouring firepower into it is not a bad plan. Jin stares forward with a serious expression while wondering if this strategy will work against Mad Skull. Jonathan sprints forward with green energy swirling around his legs as a horned creature charges after him from behind. Jonathan turns his head and shouts for the trap team. A massive horned monster lunges forward with its mouth open as Jonathan leaps away. 2 mercenaries pull on the ropes and shout that it appeared and that it is Mad Skull. The giant monster roars as the net drops over it and tightens around its body. Several mercenaries lean back and pull hard on the ropes as someone shouts to pull. The massive horned monster crashes to the ground while tangled tightly inside the net. Jonathan runs toward the trapped monster and shouts for the spears. Several mercenaries rush forward while gripping their spears. One mercenary drives his spear downward into Mad Skull through the net. Mad Skull's jaws open wide as it snarls through the net. Several mercenaries yank on the ropes to tighten the net around Mad Skull's body. Mad Skull roars loudly while trapped inside the tightening net as the mercenaries continue pulling the ropes. Jin realizes the situation is turning bad and says it's not good. Ahead of him, a huge horned monster thrashes inside a net as mercenaries struggle to hold the ropes. Several men are dragged across the ground as they struggle to keep the net tight, and one of them shouts in frustration that there are so many of them, yet they cannot even restrain a single monster. Mad Skull suddenly surges upward, tearing the net apart as pieces snap and fly through the air. Mad Skull's red eye glows fiercely as it tears through the net. A violent shockwave spreads across the ground, knocking several mercenaries off their feet and sending them tumbling away. Freed from the trap, the massive beast charges forward with explosive speed toward Claire on the ground. Seeing Mad Skull rushing at her, she raises her glowing hand in panic and realizes the danger as she stammers in shock. Claire runs forward with her glowing hand raised as Jin stands in front of her. Mad Skull's head slams into Jin as he spreads his arms and blocks it directly in front of Claire. His boots grind against the ground. He grabs Mad Skull's tusk with both hands and strains as he forces its head back. Mad Skull presses its head forward with glowing red eyes inches from his face. Claire reaches toward him and shouts that Jin, it's dangerous. Jin looks forward with a tense expression and says don't worry. Mad Skull faces forward with glowing red eyes and bared teeth as he says he knows how to take down a Mad Skull. Jin stares ahead with glowing red eyes and a sharp grin. He grips both tusks and braces himself over Mad Skull's head. Jin releases his hand and shifts his body to the side. His hand reaches for the sword behind his back as Mad Skull's face looms over him. Jin grips his sword tightly with both hands close to his face. Mad Skull's head jerks back as the sword strikes it with force. He braces his body and grips his sword tightly as he admits he thought he had gotten stronger. Mad Skull roars forward with its mouth wide open, showing its fangs and tusks as it is described to have incredible raw power. Jin turns sharply with widened eyes as he realizes he let his guard down. His eyes narrow as green energy with floating feathers swirls around his face and he reacts in confusion. He spins in midair surrounded by swirling green energy while Mad Skull charges toward him, and Claire reaches forward and says she will help too. Jin looks at the swirling energy around his body and says his body feels much lighter, like he dropped heavy weight. He smirks slightly as the green energy continues to flow around him and says he should be able to hunt it more easily with this. Several men run forward holding weapons as they shout they will help, and he turns back toward them and shouts, "No, stay back." Jonathan stares forward with a tense expression as his jaw tightens. Green energy and white feathers swirl around Jin's body as he moves and says, "For now." He dashes past Mad Skull with green energy trailing around him as he says it is easier alone. He runs forward across the ground with his sword in hand as he explains that to hunt a Mad Skull only a few things are needed. Mad Skull faces forward with glowing red eyes as he says it runs fast in a straight line. Mad Skull charges straight toward him in a direct path as he says turning is difficult for it, and he will use that to stop it. Jin leaps upward with green energy spiraling around him above the charging monster. Mad Skull crashes through debris and stone as he moves away beneath it. A clawed foot strikes the ground, cracking the surface beneath it. The Mad Skull's body scrapes across the ground as debris and stones scatter around its face. He hangs in the air looking downward as green energy and feathers swirl around him and says this is the power of the buff, and it is struggling more to chase him. He raises one hand near the creature's face as he explains its tusks are as long as longswords and function like hands. He lifts his sword overhead and says the tusks are too hard to cut with a sword. He drives his blade straight down the creature's face and says he will aim for its weak point, the nose. Blood bursts from the creature's face as it screams loudly. Mad Skull roars and thrashes as blood sprays while the pain intensifies with every movement, leaving it staggered and too burdened to continue attacking. He flips downward midair with his sword gripped in both hands as green energy and feathers spiral around him while he descends. Blood bursts from the creature's body as his blade cuts through its nose. More blood sprays from the creature's nose as its body jerks from the impact. He swings his sword beneath the towering creature as blood splashes upward, leaving Mad Skull no chance to attack again. He faces forward with a slight grin with blood splattered across his face and cloak. A group of people run out of a large stone gate holding weapons as dust lingers in the air. They stand looking over scattered rubble and broken structures as one asks what happened and another says to find Jin first. Claire and Jonathan stare ahead with wide eyes as Mutt slides past in front of them. Mutt stands with its body lowered and teeth bared as it growls. Claire stares ahead wide-eyed while Jonathan grips her shoulder and looks forward in shock. Mutt throws its head back with its jaws wide open and roars loudly as Claire stands behind and asks if it is telling them not to interfere. Mutt stands on the ground facing forward while the group gathers behind it and Jin stands ahead of them. Jin looks down with a calm expression as someone calls out that he made it back alive and asks what happened to the Mad Skull. Jin faces the group and says there is no Mad Skull now, and Jonathan responds in confusion. Mutt stands on the corpse of the fallen Mad Skull as Jin says all that is left is pork. The group surrounds the body and looks toward Jin as they say it is amazing and ask if he really did it alone, adding they have never heard of anyone taking down a Mad Skull solo. Mutt tilts its head upward with its mouth slightly open and lets out a soft whine. Mutt bares its teeth and growls while Jonathan turns his head toward it with a startled expression. A second Mad Skull steps out from the dark tunnel with glowing red eyes with its body low and facing forward. The mad skull glares forward with its eyes glowing red and its tusks bared. Jonathan grips his spear and shouts that it is a mad skull and orders everyone to prepare for battle. Claire steps forward with her hand raised toward him and tells him to wait. Mad Skull lowers its head beside two small piglets standing near its legs as it is revealed that it has piglets. Two piglets stand side by side looking forward and squeal. Mad Skull lowers its head and growls with one eye narrowed as it snorts. Jin stands facing forward while Mutt beside him bares its teeth and growls. Mad Skull stands near the tunnel entrance with its head lowered beside the piglets as they stay close to it. The group stands facing the Mad Skull and its piglets while the creature remains in front of them and someone says they are leaving. Jonathan stands with his spear lowered while Claire looks uneasy, and he says the creature must have been planning to raise its young here and adds that she feels bad. Jin looks ahead calmly and says he is glad it left peacefully. A quiet city street lies under the night sky with the full moon overhead identified as 5th Pioneer City. A closed building with a wooden door and a hanging sign sits along the street with warm light glowing from the windows. Jonathan stands with his arms spread wide at the table as the group around him cheers, and he praises everyone for finishing without serious injuries, and says he is happy they caught the Mad Skull. He leans forward with a confident grin and gestures with his hand as he announces the highlight of the hunt, and says it is time for settlement. Several men around the table raise their fists and shout in excitement as food and drinks sit spread out in front of them. Claire sits at the table holding a sack while Jin behind her crosses his arms, and she says the reward was supposed to be 70 gold coins, but this looks like more. A bag filled with gold coins sits open on the table as he says it is thanks to him making a fuss over it. An image of two mad skulls and piglets appears as he explains there were two of them and the job was more dangerous than expected, so he demanded a bigger reward. Jonathan spreads his arms wide behind several sacks of gold as he declares the reward is 110 gold coins while the others cheer. Jin stands with his arms crossed facing him and questions why they still received the money despite not fighting the mother, and Jonathan responds hesitantly. Jonathan smirks with his hand over his mouth and says he told a little white lie. Two men grin and give thumbs up as they laugh, and one says that is their captain, and if you do not get caught it becomes the truth. Jin stands with his arms crossed and exhales as he calls them interesting people. A hand grabs Jin's shoulder from behind as he turns his head slightly and Jonathan calls out. Jonathan holds Jin by the shoulder and says he is thinking of giving half of the earnings to Jin and asks if anyone has a problem. Jin looks to the side with a surprised expression and repeats half of it. Jonathan smiles calmly and says they would have died without him and asks him to accept it happily. He keeps his hand on Jin's shoulder while facing the group and says the increased reward is enough for everyone to split and that it is what they all want. Two men sit at the table smiling and one gives a thumbs up while laughing while another raises the mug beside him. Jin touches his cheek with one finger and looks forward as he acknowledges the buff and the trap were a big help. A hand grips a foamy mug on the table as he says it seems not everyone here is bad. Jin raises a mug high while Jonathan pumps his fist and he shouts that he will pay for all the drinks tonight as the group cheers. Several men tilt barrels over their heads and drink heavily while others raise fists and shout to keep drinking and get wasted. Jin sits holding a mug as he turns his head toward Claire passing by. Claire walks toward the door with a bag at her side and says she's going to practice some magic as Jin calls out to her. Jin looks forward with a slightly surprised expression and repeats practice some magic. A full moon hangs over the night sky as Claire sits on the ground facing the town with her body surrounded by a faint blue aura. Claire sits cross-legged with her eyes closed and hands resting on her knees as blue energy flows upward around her. Jin stands with his arms crossed near a tree watching her and notes she must be tired and that training right after a hunt is impressive. Jin looks toward her with a focused expression and says magic. Jin considers learning magic as Claire remains seated in front of him glowing with blue energy. Claire turns toward Jin in a storage area while holding a crate as he carries a large rolled net over his shoulder and asks if she can teach him magic. She faces him calmly with the crate in her hands, while Jin stands beside her thinking she agreed pretty easily while she says she wanted to give him something as a gift anyway. Claire leans back against the crates with her arms relaxed and says he saved her when the Mad Skull charged at them and that teaching him magic is the least she can do. Claire stands facing Jin with one hand on her hip, as she says she would refuse to teach a mercenary group that does not protect their mages, while Jonathan looks aside with a troubled expression. Jonathan leans in with a grin and raises a finger beside Claire as he says magic cannot be learned overnight and that they are leaving in 2 days. Claire faces him with a serious expression as he laughs and suggests Jin should come with them, and she questions why a strong hunter like him would follow mercenaries like them. Jonathan places his hand on Jin's shoulder and smiles with his eyes closed as he says a brave wolf is usually most comfortable alone, and that it would be rude for them to intrude on his journey. Jin looks forward with a flat expression and says he has nothing to do and feels pressured by the situation. Jin stands beside Jonathan and Claire as he asks about their next destination, and Jonathan raises both hands while Claire grabs his vest and says it is the 4th Pioneer City where there is a big job. Jin turns his head slightly and says he was already planning to go there and asks if he can accompany them. Jin lifts a large rolled net and awkwardly says he could learn magic along the way while Jonathan and Claire grin with flushed faces and give a thumbs up as they remark he is terrible at lying and that they hooked him. Jonathan wraps an arm around Jin and grins widely while Claire leans against him with her eyes closed, and he says it is a coincidence and that it is great to have a reliable ally. Jin looks forward with a small smirk as the next destination has been decided. A large armored beast walks along the path carrying a structure on its back while several people travel nearby. A massive creature lifts its head and roars as it is identified as a Teresk, a monster bred for transport and tamed by humanity. Jin stands beside the enormous creature with a bag on his back and looks up at it as he notes it is used as a pack animal and that it is massive. Jonathan walks ahead with a bag over his shoulder and gestures forward as he says to get moving because they have a long way to go. Jin sits cross-legged under the moon with Claire beside him, both with eyes closed, as he focuses on training and says learning something new is difficult. Sweat runs down Jin's face as he keeps his eyes closed and says learning is hard with the most difficult part being repetitive effort. Claire stands facing Jin with a glowing blue orb in her hand as he says growth in certain tasks is only possible through repetition. Jin looks to the side with sweat running down his face as he says this is hard and continues repeating the same action. Jin sits under the night sky while Claire gestures beside him and he says he is used to this pain. He endured 12 years of pain in the demonic realm and has become tougher because of it. Jin sits cross-legged under the moon as leaves fall around him in silence. Jin opens his eyes slightly as a faint blue stream of energy flows near his face and he focuses on it. A small blue spark forms and drifts upward as he recognizes the sensation. Claire clasps her hands and leans forward with excitement as she says he succeeded in feeling the magic, and Jin turns his head and asks if that was mana. Jin looks forward with a slight smile and says it took 10 days just to feel mana and that it is difficult. Claire kneels beside him with her hands resting on her knees and smiles as she says he is slow but still excellent and that some people never feel mana at all. Claire reaches into her pouch and pulls out a small bottle as she says they will move on to the second stage. She tilts the bottle and pours glowing blue liquid into a shallow dish as it ripples with light. Claire raises one hand calmly and looks at Jin as she tells him to undress. Jin turns his head toward her with a startled expression as she clenches her gloved fist in front of him. Leaves drift under the bright moon in the night sky. A glowing blue droplet falls from her fingertip into the liquid below as she says, "Excuse me." Jin turns his head in confusion and asks what she is doing. Claire presses her gloved hand against his back and a glowing magic circle spreads across his skin, forming intricate symbols and lines. She calmly explains that she can inject mana into his body with it and that she is creating a path. The formation completes covering his entire back as she says it is done and tells him she will begin injecting mana, asking him to focus and feel it carefully. Jin closes his eyes and responds quietly. In the next moment, the circle flares to life. A surge of blue energy pours into his body, and his entire figure lights up as streams of mana cascade through him. The power intensifies, spiraling upward under the moonlight as his muscles tense. Jin clenches slightly as the sensation overwhelms him and realizes the feeling is on a completely different level than before. Deep inside, glowing currents begin to spread, branching through his body like veins of light. He senses something thicker than blood moving within him. Claire watches from behind and asks if he can feel the mana. Jin steadies himself and answers that he can feel something flowing inside his body. Claire closes her eyes and speaks calmly, telling him he has taken the first step to using magic and that there are 3 basic stages. A glowing figure presses a hand over a magic circle as bright energy erupts downward, and she explains the stages are feeling mana, storing it, and then utilizing it. Claire places a hand on her chest and looks forward, saying since he succeeded in the first stage, they will move to the second. Jin sits upright with his eyes closed and one hand raised as blue energy surrounds him while she says she will control the mana and send it toward his heart, and tells him to hold his breath sensation to create a vessel. Jin tightens his expression with sweat running down his face as he says he is preparing to store the mana in his body. Claire sits behind him with her hand on his back as a surge of blue light bursts outward, and she says she will start. A glowing magic circle spreads across Jin's back as streams of blue energy rise around him. A distorted insect-like creature attacks another monster from behind as its glowing eyes appear against a dark splattered background. A large insect-like creature with glowing eyes bites into another monster as its wings spread against a dark splattered background. The creature's body twists forward, showing its segmented torso and long limbs. Its back arches as its wings and abdomen stretch outward in a distorted pose. A cluster of red glowing eyes fills its head, all staring forward. Claire's eyes widen as sweat forms on her face, and she looks forward in alarm while questioning the ominous energy. She turns her head sharply to the side as blue energy streams past her. She thrusts both hands forward toward Jin's back as a swirling blue vortex forms at his lower back. Her eye trembles with tears and sweat as she realizes her mana is being absorbed and fears it will all be drained. A sharp tail wraps around Claire from behind as her body jerks backward from the impact. Mutt lifts Claire into the air with its tail as blue energy trails around her body, while Jin sits cross-legged nearby within a swirling blue aura. The red wolf lowers Claire to the ground as she lands on her feet and stares in shock, asking if it is the red wolf. The red wolf lowers its head and glares at her with glowing eyes. Sweat runs down Claire's face as she looks ahead and wonders if it came to help her. Jin steps toward her with his arm raised and calls out to her. He reaches toward her with concern and asks if she is okay. Claire looks to the side with a tense expression as sweat drips down her face and realizes what she saw was his mental world. A dark insect-like creature with glowing red eyes stands over twisted ground as a person's power and nature take shape and appear as a world. A mass covered in many glowing red eyes fills the darkness as a person's mental world differs depending on the life they have lived. Jin stands shirtless in the dark mental world while enormous eyes and a looming creature surround him as such an ominous presence exists inside his mind. Claire leans toward Jin as he sits on the ground and she asks him to answer her honestly. Claire stands with her arms crossed and asks Jin if he has eaten an internal core. Jin looks up at her and asks what an internal core is. A glowing crystal core floats in the air as she explains it is the crystal found inside a monster's body, and Jin answers that he has eaten monster essence. Claire grabs Jin by the shoulders and shouts in shock that he ate internal cores and demands to know when and how many he ate. Claire stares forward with wide eyes and sweat on her face as Jin says he started eating internal cores while hunting monsters and has continued eating them for about 10 years, possibly thousands or tens of thousands. Jin scratches the back of his head and asks why she is asking and whether there is a problem, and Claire shouts that there is definitely a problem. Claire lowers her voice and says that if a human eats an internal core. Claire looks down with a tense expression and says they either die or turn into a monster. Jin tilts his head upward under the moonlight as one of his eyes glows red. A deer stands over a bloody carcass in a dark forest as she says karma is also known as retribution. A deer with glowing eyes and blood around its mouth stands in the forest as karma is the turbid energy found in the demonic realm, and beings that absorb it gain bizarre abilities in their bodies. A monstrous deer roars as a monster core is a nucleus formed from accumulated karma inside the body. Claire stands beside the Teresk, while Jin and Jonathan walk near it on the forest path. Claire narrows her eye and says it is bothering her while saying the dark priest appears when the otherworldly gate opens and karma swallows the world. A robed figure raises his arm as a mass of eyes spreads behind him, and some humans follow the monsters that absorb karma and begin calling them angels. A monstrous deer stands over a human body on a stone altar as those people eat monster cores, and some sacrifice humans to monsters, and they are called madmen. Jin looks forward and says he started eating them while hunting monsters and has continued eating them for about 10 years, possibly thousands or tens of thousands. A mass of glowing red eyes fills the darkness as Claire realizes Jin has eaten monster cores and wonders if he could be a dark priest. Claire lowers her head in thought while Jin stands behind her with a question mark over his head as she concludes he cannot be a dark priest because he would not admit to eating monster cores or show her his mental world. Jin swings his sword and slices through a purple creature as Claire walks away behind him and wonders if it is even stranger that he kept eating monster cores without knowing they were dangerous. Jin holds the severed creature in one hand as blood drips from the cut. Claire closes her eyes while Jin stands behind her chewing, and she wonders why he would pick up and eat something so disgusting. Claire folds her arms and looks ahead while Jin chews beside her as she thinks he is truly a mysterious man and wonders what he eats now, and Jin copied monsters eating monster cores. She leans toward Jin with a serious expression and tells him he must stop eating monster cores from now on because he has only been lucky so far and could really die. Jin rests his hand against his chin and thinks that she says eating monster cores kills a person or turns them into a monster, yet he stands alive in front of her and wonders if that information is wrong. Jin looks forward with a calm expression as he wonders if feeling nothing after killing people and constantly wanting to fight is because of the monster cores. Jin's eye glows red as he stares ahead and wonders if the monster cores are the reason. Jin walks away with a sack over his shoulder and says he will try, and Claire shouts after him that he must absolutely stop eating monster cores. Claire stands behind him with her arms crossed and warns that if he keeps eating monster cores his life will be at risk, and he will not be able to use magic, and Jin suddenly reacts in surprise. Jin looks back at her and asks if it is true that he will not be able to use magic, and Claire replies that it is more important than his life. Claire exhales and says that in his current state it will be difficult for him to use mana manifestation, but tells him not to worry too much. Claire raises one finger and says he should still be able to use mana arts at least. Jin turns his head and asks what mana arts are. Fourth Pioneer City stands with a tall tower rising above the surrounding buildings. People gather in a plaza beneath a tall column topped with a winged statue as water flows from the fountain around it. Jin looks around the crowded plaza as Claire and Jonathan stand behind him, and he says many mercenaries have gathered here, and it is too early to be surprised because of the scale of the request. A silver-haired knight in armor walks before the crowd as the request is being overseen by a holy knight. Holy Knight Raymond walks forward in full armor with a long sword at his side. Jin glances back while Claire smiles beside him as the Holy Knight watches them from behind. The Holy Knight looks toward Jin and senses an intense aura that cannot be compared to mercenaries and recognizes he is no ordinary human. Jin looks toward Claire and asks if many people usually gather when a Holy Knight is in charge. Claire explains that it is because the request comes from the Golden Bug Wolf. Jin looks at Claire and asks if the Golden Bug is an insect-type monster, and she asks if he really does not know about the Golden Bug. Jin stares back with a confused expression as she says he really knows nothing except hunting. Jin walks beside Jonathan and Claire as he lifts his arms behind his head and says the Golden Bug is the greatest businessman and a tycoon with countless assets, making him one of the richest people anywhere. Jonathan lowers his gaze and says the Golden Bug died suddenly recently. Jin walks beside him and asks if the Golden Bug was killed. Jonathan walks with his arms behind his head and says there are rumors about that but nothing is certain. Jin looks toward the crowd gathered around the request board and asks why so many people have gathered if the Golden Bug is dead. Jonathan walks beside Jin and explains the Golden Bug has two sons. The two sons stand back to back while gold treasure chests and valuables shine beneath them as someone must move the son's fortune inside the barrier. Jin looks ahead in silence and thinks about moving a tycoon's fortune as he notices the large crowd gathered. Jin stiffens slightly while standing with Claire and Jonathan as a voice calls for the Black Marlin mercenary group to come forward. Jonathan pushes Jin forward through the crowd, shouting that it is finally their turn and telling him to come with him. He stands beside Jin and gestures toward him while presenting him as the mercenary group's top power who caught a mad skull and tamed a werewolf. Jin turns his head slightly as sweat runs down his face, while people in the crowd look toward him and say he is the rumored head crusher and that he does not look that strong. Jonathan smiles beside Jin while Jin looks uneasy and the man says to ignore the nonsense and that things will go well if they put up with it. The silver-haired Holy Knight Raymond looks forward with a calm expression. Jin and Jonathan stand in front of the request board, while Raymond announces that the Black Marlin mercenary group will receive a reward of 100 gold coins and must depart tomorrow at sunrise. Jonathan clenches his fist and shouts for them to go while Jin raises his fist beside him and says they are paying 100 gold coins just to move luggage. He smiles confidently and gives a thumbs up while explaining that half of the payment is for the labor and half is for the name value, which is how the hiring fee is set. Jin looks forward with a calm expression as sweat runs down his face, while Jonathan says they got a great rate thanks to Jin's name value as the head crusher. Jonathan stands beside Jin and explains that head crusher is the nickname attached to him, while an image of Jin crushing the head of a monster appears above them. Jin exhales with a tired expression and says whoever came up with that nickname has terrible naming sense. Jonathan walks beside Jin with a sack over his shoulder and says that 100 gold coins is like hitting the jackpot, while Jin walks beside him silently. Jin looks forward with a serious expression and says that this level of fame will help him learn mana arts. A large building stands under the moonlight as lamps glow from the windows, and the place is identified as the mercenary group quarters. Inside a crowded arena, a fighter battles another man while people around the ring shout for him to kill and tell the opponent not to run away. A fighter's fist slams into another fighter's face, snapping his head back from the impact. Claire stands near the arena railing and asks if Jin will be okay participating in the arena, while a fighter in the ring raises his arms in victory, and Jin wraps bandages around his hands. Jin tightens the bandage around his fist and says he plans to draw their attention and learn mana arts while Claire watches him with a worried expression. Jin stands inside the wooden arena adjusting the bandages on his arm as the chronicle explains that holy knights are beings who become interested when they see someone strong. Raymond looks forward with a calm expression as the chronicle explains that if they acknowledge someone's strength, that person can receive good treatment. Jin stands in the arena facing an opponent with his fists wrapped and says this will not be too hard for him. Jin looks toward the arena stands and says this arena is where fighters risk each other's reputations and that he will draw the Holy Knight's attention here. Jin strikes his opponent's face with a fast punch and calls it the first one. An opponent's arm swings across and hits Jin's face from the side. Jin's fist slams into the opponent's face and blood bursts outward as the man's head jerks back from the impact. Jin grabs the opponent's head with both hands as the opponent's body recoils. Jin drives his head into the opponent's face. The opponent's body whips backward through the air as Jin stands with one leg raised and the crowd cheers that the head crusher is living up to his name. Raymond lifts a mug and drinks while looking toward the arena as Jin realizes he has drawn attention. Jin swings another punch into a different opponent's face and thinks that just drawing attention is not enough and that the real start is now. Jin spins and kicks an opponent across the head as he thinks he must defeat more fighters to make the Holy Knight take him seriously. Jin drives his knee down into another opponent's head while thinking that defeating 2 or 3 fighters like this should be enough. Raymond stands at the balcony railing watching the arena while Jin thinks that the Holy Knight will wonder where someone like him came from. Jin stands in the arena with defeated fighters lying on the ground around him and thinks about defeating many opponents. Jin looks toward the balcony where Raymond and the red-haired knight stand while thinking that a real knight would think like this. Raymond turns his head toward the red-haired knight and tells Rex to fight that guy. Rex looks forward with a tense expression and reacts in disbelief at being told to fight a mere mercenary. Jin stands below the balcony while Raymond and Rex look down at him as it becomes clear that when that moment arrives, that is when things truly begin. Jin looks forward with a calm expression and says he refuses, declaring that this is how negotiations to learn mana arts begin. Rex stares forward with widened eyes and reacts in shock. The mercenary dormitory stands under the night sky as the full moon shines above the building. Claire looks ahead with a worried expression and remains silent. Jonathan looks forward silently with a tense face. Several people in the arena crowd stare toward the ring with confused expressions, and one of them asks what is going on. Rex grips the railing and shouts down at Jin, demanding to know why he refuses. Rex clenches his fist and grits his teeth in anger while Raymond looks forward calmly beside him. Raymond stands at the railing and looks down at Jin while asking if he is hurt anywhere. Jin raises one bandaged hand with a relaxed smile and says he is not hurt at all. Raymond narrows his eyes and asks why Jin is refusing the duel. Jin stands in the arena with one hand on his chest and tells the Holy Knight that he is a mercenary who chases money and power and cannot fight a Holy Knight apprentice for free. Jin looks up with a confident smile and says they should make a bet. Raymond looks down thoughtfully and says that for a bet to work, both sides must have something they want, and asks what they could possibly want from him. Jin crouches beside a fallen fighter while looking up at them and says that even if he is not a grand enough figure to boost their reputation, he does have an ungodly amount of money. He lifts a heavy money pouch filled with gold coins as it swings in his hand. Jin stands in the arena holding the pouch while the crowd reacts in shock and someone shouts that he is suggesting gambling with a Holy Knight. Rex glares forward with clenched teeth and angrily calls Jin a bastard. Raymond reaches out and grabs Rex's shoulder as Raymond shouts that they do not need Jin's money. He looks forward calmly and says instead. Jin looks up at 2 figures in robes standing behind a wooden railing as Raymond says they will waive all liability for any damages sustained during the fight. Raymond looks down from the balcony and says that is what they want. Jin smiles and taps his chest with his finger, saying he will tell them what he wants after the duel is over, as he thinks that without paying any settlement, he can beat Rex as much as he wants, and says he accepts. Rex tightens the bandages around his hand while standing across from Jin in the arena. Rex stares forward with a tense glare as sweat marks and shadows cover his face. Jin looks straight ahead with narrowed eyes and a calm expression. Spectators lean over the railing and shout encouragement, while pointing toward the arena saying to go for it and betting their fortune on Jin. Jin turns his body slightly while Claire stands behind him with her hands clenched, and Jonathan crosses his arms and tells Jin to give a signal if it becomes dangerous, and Jin answers not to worry. Jin tilts his head with a confident smile and says he will win. Rex stands in the arena looking forward while asking how far he should go, and Raymond answers from the balcony to give it his all. Raymond looks down toward the arena with narrowed eyes and says Jin will certainly not be an easy opponent. Rex stands with his back to the viewer as golden energy swirls around his body, and he clenches both fists while saying he understands. Several spectators lean over the railing and shout excitedly as they notice mana arts and cheer for the Holy Knight. Rex plants his foot on the ground as golden energy spirals around his leg. Rex rushes forward with golden energy trailing around him as he closes the distance toward Jin. Jin turns his head with wide eyes and thinks Rex's speed is on a completely different level. Rex's fist crashes into Jin's body with a burst of golden force. Jin's face tightens with blood at the corner of his mouth as he realizes that taking a clean hit from an attack like this could kill him. Rex's arm drives forward through the air with golden energy streaming around it as Jin watches closely and calls the mana arts interesting. Jin raises his bandaged hand in front of his face and blocks the incoming strike. Rex drives his glowing fist straight down toward Jin with golden energy bursting around the impact point. The blow explodes against Jin and throws him backward across the arena floor. Jin wipes the blood from his mouth with the back of his bandaged hand, and Rex asks if his name was Jin. Rex glares forward with golden energy flickering around his fist and says Jin may be a renowned mercenary in the demonic realm, but he is still just a wild beast, and he will make him regret looking down on a Holy Knight. Spectators lean over the railing in shock as they say the Crusher is being pushed back and that even an apprentice Holy Knight is on another level, while one man shouts that he might lose all his money. Claire watches the fight with a tense expression and murmurs Jin's name. Raymond stands with his arms crossed and watches the arena silently. Rex rushes forward surrounded by spiraling golden energy as Jin raises his arms and braces while sliding backward. Jin shields his face with his bandaged hand as the golden force crashes toward him. The impact blasts Jin backward across the arena floor. Raymond touches his chin and wonders what this strange feeling is. Jin crosses his arms in front of his body and blocks as golden strikes crash against him, while the observer notes that when he fought the other mercenaries, he defeated them all with a single strike. Raymond narrows his eye and observes that Jin's movements right now are extremely passive and wonders if he is hiding something. Rex shouts angrily with his teeth clenched. Rex leaps high into the air with golden energy spiraling around his arm and drives a glowing fist downward. The glowing strike slams toward Jin as he deflects it across the arena. Jin leans aside and extends his hand as Rex's glowing strike crashes into the balcony beside him and shatters the floor. Jonathan clenches his fist and shouts that Jin deflected the Holy Knight's mana arts with his bare hand while asking if that is even possible. He stares forward with wide eyes and a tense expression. Jin turns his back slightly with blood dripping from his mouth and says with this. He wipes the blood from his mouth with a faint smile and says he is done measuring Rex's combat power. Jin lowers his bandaged fist and asks if he should check Rex's durability next. His strike slams into Rex's body with a violent impact that bursts outward. Rex's eyes widen in shock as sweat runs down his face. Raymond frowns in confusion and thinks that Rex was only hit by a normal punch, yet he is making that kind of expression and wonders if that man was not waiting for an opening all this time. Rex bends forward and coughs violently while Jin stands calmly beside him, and the knight realizes Jin was simply savoring the fight. Jin looks down with a faint smile, blood still on the corner of his mouth. Jin bends down and says he hit Rex pretty hard, yet he is still enduring it, and wonders if that is thanks to Rex's mana arts as well. Rex, sweating and breathing heavily, says he is curious. Jin cracks his fingers and says he wants to see just how many hits Rex can endure. Rex's expression tightens in confusion as he senses someone step forward. Raymond raises his hand toward Rex and calmly says stop, adding that it is Rex's loss. He faces forward with a stern expression and says they will grant what was promised, telling him to end it here. Jin stands with a relaxed posture, his bandaged hand hanging at his side, and says he was just getting started and calls it a buzzkill. He forms a faint smile with blood smeared on his lips as he remains still. He concludes that his plan was a success. The crowd leans forward with raised fists around the arena as they shout in excitement. Jin stands facing the two knights on the platform. A large mansion stands under the night sky with a fountain in front. This place is Golden Bug Wolf's mansion. A man bites into a large piece of meat as grease drips from his mouth. Two shirtless men sit at a table covered in food and tear into meat with their hands. They are Golden Bug's first son Derek and second son Cedric. Both men chew on large pieces of meat as sweat runs down their faces. One of them says it will take 10 days to get inside the wall and curses the Order Alliance for it. He chews with his teeth clenched as sweat runs down his face and says that is how those bastards operate, calling them all talk and no substance. A hand tightly grips a bundle of noodles and squeezes it as sauce splatters outward. He asks if they will be okay until then and says there is nothing else they can do. One man leans over the table while holding food near his mouth, his back covered in glowing blue growths. He says they just have to pray their bodies hold out until then. The blue growths bulge and pulse across his skin. Raymond stands beside a tree with his hand resting on the trunk and his sword at his side, and he says mana arts exist. He stands with his back turned beside the tree as his cloak hangs down, and he says mana is used like part of the body to enhance one's body or weapons. His hand grips the sword hilt as golden energy wraps around it, and he says anyone with some talent can use it, but its power depends on proficiency. A sweeping golden arc tears through the air as Raymond swings his sword, and he says the technique is a basic form capable of splitting mountains and seas, called Sacred Fire Slash. A violent shockwave blasts through the area as trees bend and debris scatters, and birds scatter into the sky as the impact erupts. Raymond stands calmly with his sword lowered as golden energy surrounds him. Rex clasps his hands together with a wide smile and praises Raymond, calling him amazing. He leans forward and points excitedly while speaking, and Raymond turns slightly and tells him to back off. Rex throws one arm up energetically with a big grin and shouts that he understands, telling him to keep up the good work. Jin stands with a neutral expression as an image of a beast appears behind him, and he says he feels like he has seen that somewhere before. He looks ahead with a calm, unreadable expression as his eyes narrow slightly, while he wonders if that was even a proper mana art, and thinks it definitely feels stronger than what that apprentice knight used. Jin stands with his hand on his chin in thought, and he questions if that level should be possible even without a technique. Raymond turns his head toward Jin while standing beside him, and he says he has already shown him firsthand and tells him to focus again as Jin answers yes. Jin grips his sword with both hands while standing straight, and Raymond stands close behind him and explains that when he flexes his arm, the veins pop and the muscles contract. Raymond closes his eyes slightly as he speaks, and he says, "You're holding the mana within your muscles." Jin narrows his eyes with a focused expression and says up to this point, it is similar to what Claire taught him. A faint blue flow moves across his face as he looks forward and reacts with a quiet sound. He looks down at his hand as blue energy flows around his arm, and he notices there is a large amount of mana flowing through his body and questions when he had this much mana. In a memory, Claire places her hand on Jin's back as blue energy flows between them, and he says mana is calm and light, and he recognizes it as Claire's mana. Dark purple energy coils tightly around Jin's torso and arm as he stands still. Raymond turns his head slightly while speaking and tells Jin to gradually consume that mana and says moving your body at first can help. The purple energy thickens and coils beside Jin's body, and Raymond turns sharply with a startled expression. Jin grips his sword tightly with both hands as purple energy wraps around the blade, and sweat runs down his face as he looks forward. Raymond stares with widened eyes and reacts in shock that Jin is using mana arts immediately after learning it and focuses on the ominous mana. The blade is engulfed in dense purple energy that twists around it, and he questions what that ominous mana is. Raymond looks down toward Jin while speaking and says mana arts take their color and form based on one's mental world, and adds but to have such mana that feels so ominous while Jin holds his sword as the purple energy surrounds it. Raymond narrows his eyes and calls Jin's name as he demands to know what is inside him. He raises his sword in front of his face while purple energy coils around his body and blade as he smirks. He swings the sword as a wide arc of purple energy extends outward and his body is lifted sideways by the force. He grips the sword with both hands and drives it downward as purple energy surges along the blade. Jin lowers his gaze with a serious expression as purple energy surrounds him, and he questions if his proficiency is low and says it feels inefficient compared to the effort required. He stands upright holding the sword as dark purple energy surrounds the blade, and he smirks and says this is fucking cool and that he cannot wait to try it out in real combat. Two massive turtle-like beasts carry structures and supplies on their backs, while several people walk alongside them across a grassy path. Jin stands beside the smiling Claire while carrying a bag on his back and clutching its strap, and she says he has already mastered mana arts and that it could not have been easy and that it is amazing, and he says that it is all thanks to her. He turns his head toward Claire with a concerned expression and asks if she is okay and says that when she helped him last time it felt like her mana went inside him. Claire widens her eyes slightly with a small sweat drop on her cheek. She smiles and lightly raises her hand toward her face while facing him and says she is fine and that he saved her before so he should consider it a gift. Jin looks forward with a calm expression as he reflects that there was too much mana to ignore and that thanks to it he learned mana arts quickly. Rex on horseback looks ahead while speaking as Jin turns his head back with a small surprised reaction and hears that it is unbelievable to rejoice over just the basics, and Jin responds with a questioning sound. Rex looks down with a stern expression and speaks as he tells him not to slack off and to be grateful to Lord Raymond. Jin and Claire stand side by side looking toward Rex with unimpressed expressions as he questions why he is spouting nonsense and wonders if he is still upset about losing yesterday. He smirks with narrowed eyes as he says he was getting bored anyway and that he should bruise his ego and pick a fight. A gloved hand strikes the horse's side with a sharp impact. The horse jerks its head up with its eyes bulging and teeth clenched as it neighs loudly while Rex yanks the reins in shock. Raymond sits upright on his horse while looking forward as Rex speeds away down the path, and he says Jin should understand and that he will keep him in check while Jin thinks what a shame. Raymond rides past Jin while a voice shouts "You idiots" as Jin stands beside him and reacts with confusion. Food and dishes scatter through the air as containers break apart, and a voice off-screen shouts that they are hungry and demands it be brought faster. Jin rests a bag over his shoulder and looks toward the distance with a neutral expression as he says it looks like something is going on over there, while Raymond in front tells him not to worry about it. Two workers stand beside a wooden platform loaded with barrels and sacks as one handles the goods, and explains that it is just the usual power trip from the employers, while another voice asks if they mean the Golden Bug Sons. Two shirtless men sit at a table in a dim room while eating messily with food scattered around as one holds a glass and the other stuffs his mouth, and it is explained that since Golden Bug Wolf's death they have been binge eating and throw tantrums if their meals are delayed. Raymond narrows his eyes slightly as he speaks calmly, and says it will only give a headache to care, so ignoring them is the answer. Jin tilts his head slightly with a doubtful expression as he questions whether it is strange for it to just be stress-induced binge eating while thinking he has a bad feeling about this. A man shoves food into his mouth with sweat on his face as he chews messily, while it is stated that the more food disappears the stronger it feels. A grotesque man drools heavily with bulging eyes and veins popping as he gags and retches violently. Jin stares forward with a serious expression as it is stated that it feels like a monster is about to burst out. Jin's eye widens sharply as he reacts in sudden alarm. Teresk bursts upward from the ground as debris flies into the air, and Jin looks up while shouting what is going on all of a sudden. Teresk slams its head down with its mouth open and tongue hanging out as it roars loudly. Workers recoil and point toward the enormous creature towering over them as they shout in panic that the Teresk carrying their clients has suddenly started rampaging. Raymond's eyes widen in shock as he realizes the situation involves the Golden Bug Sons. Raymond shouts "Rex," while Rex pulls the reins hard and Rex responds immediately, "Yes, sir." Raymond raises his sword as golden energy surrounds him, his cloak whipping with the surge of power. Both knights launch forward in a coordinated charge, cloaked in glowing aura, as Raymond commands that the client's safety is their top priority and orders them to calm the Tarrasque even if they have to kill it. Below them, the massive creature's body heaves as the response understood. Echoes. Multiple long dark spikes pierce upward from within the Tarrasque's body, tearing through it from the inside. Debris including tables, barrels, and wooden structures erupts into the air as something massive forces its way out. A horrifying mass of writhing tentacles bursts forth, ending in a grotesque circular maw filled with teeth, letting out a piercing screech. Nearby, Claire recoils in shock, shouting, "Is that an abomination?" While Jin looks up, repeating in disbelief, "An abomination." Claire stares forward with wide, trembling eyes and sweat on her face, as she says that a human turned into a monster because of the demonic realm's karma. Jin lowers his gaze with one eye glowing red as he says that is what an abomination is, while repeating a human turned into a monster. Raymond exhales softly with his lips slightly parted as air escapes. He leaps upward with his sword glowing gold as he swings downward toward the massive creature's body looming above. Raymond drives a vertical golden slash straight through the creature's body as the attack sacred fire slash splits it open from top to bottom. He continues the downward motion of his strike as the creature's body separates along the glowing cut and blood sprays outward. Raymond turns his head sharply with a wide, shouting expression as he yells Rex. Rex rushes forward along the ground, gripping his sword with both hands while looking up at the falling split creature. Rex swings his sword in a wide arc as a glowing golden slash slices through the creature and shatters it into spinning fragments. Chunks of the creature's flesh and broken pieces scatter across the ground as dark blood splashes outward in multiple directions. The creature's circular mouth lined with teeth churns violently as its fleshy interior twists and writhes. Raymond turns with a shocked expression and wide eyes as he shouts its body regenerated. And wait. The monstrous creature looms directly behind Rex with its split mouth fully opened and glowing red eyes glaring downward while a voice calls out Rex. Rex turns his head with tense eyes and clenched teeth as he says, "Damn it." Raymond charges forward with his sword glowing gold and raised over his shoulder as he shouts Rex, while the monster's open mouth looms above Rex as he glances back. A severed arm tightly grips a sword as it flies through the air with blood trailing from it while the creature swallows Rex's body. Jin stares forward with widened eyes and a tense expression. Claire and two men beside her stare ahead with shocked expressions as their bodies stiffen in alarm. A gloved hand grips a weapon, while blood sprays across the arm as Raymond lunges upward beneath it with a focused expression. Raymond narrows his eyes and grits his teeth with a tense expression as he says, "Damn it." He raises his glowing sword overhead as golden energy swirls around him, while the monster's head faces him with blood dripping from its mouth. Raymond swings his glowing blade downward as he unleashes sacred fire slash, and a bright golden arc cleaves through the monster's body with blood spraying outward. The monster's split mouth convulses as chunks of flesh tear apart and blood sprays outward while it roars. Raymond falls downward through the air with his cape flaring as he shouts Rex above the writhing monster's body. Raymond braces himself against the creature's surface with both hands while leaning forward and shouting Rex, "Hold on. I'll save you soon." Tall dark tendrils rise sharply from the ground around the fallen monster as they stretch upward in multiple directions, while Raymond stands near it and shouts, "You can't give up." Jin turns his head with a tense expression as his eyes narrow slightly. Several long tendrils plunge downward toward Raymond as he crouches beside the monster's body. Jin grabs Raymond around the torso and pulls him away as spinning wind arcs cut through the attacking tendrils around them. Jin lands while holding Raymond in his arms as dust and debris scatter outward. Raymond collapses forward onto the ground with his body slumped and blood staining his side. Jin turns his head with a tense expression while people behind him look on in panic and shout that the Holy Knight is down and ask if they are all going to die at this rate. The grotesque monster stands upright with its swollen body and multiple tendrils writhing upward as its red eyes glow intensely. The monster's circular mouth opens wide at the top of its head with rows of teeth exposed, while narration states that the abomination is a human who turned into a monster. Jin stares forward with glowing red eyes and a serious expression as he questions if continuing to consume internal cores will make him become like that someday. The monster's massive mouth gapes open with its tongue extended toward Jin standing below ready to attack, while the narration states that worrying will not solve anything and that he needs to get rid of the abomination. Jin dashes forward with his cloak sweeping around him as multiple tendrils whip past him and the words incredible digestion appear. He spins his body and slashes through the thick tendrils with his sword, cutting across their surfaces in a sweeping arc. The monster's upper body liquefies and reforms as its flesh drips and reshapes, showing that its regeneration is endless. Jin twists his body while slipping between thick whipping tendrils as this fight becomes a battle of attrition. The monster's circular mouth remains wide open with jagged teeth exposed as its body sheds and regenerates while he states he must find its weakness while saving stamina. A massive tendril slams into Jin's raised blade as he braces and blocks the impact. Jin plants his feet wide and swings his sword in a powerful arc, cutting through the air with force. He grits his teeth and tightens his expression while saying, "Damn it," as his cloak ripples around him. A spear spins rapidly through the air with sharp motion lines cutting across the sky. In the distance, Jonathan throws a spear at full force as it blasts forward with a shockwave toward the creature and splits the tendrils apart on impact. Jonathan stands in the distance facing Jin while smiling and saying, "We'll help too," as Jin turns his head toward him. An open glowing book floats above an outstretched hand as light shines from its pages while a voice declares, "Thy sword." Claire floats forward with her cloak and hair flowing as blue magic surrounds her body, and she raises a glowing orb while declaring, "Shall thwart evil." Two fighters step forward gripping their weapons as blue energy wraps around their legs while dark tendrils rise around their feet. A man raises his spear overhead and shouts, "Its regeneration is slowing down thanks to the magic." While others behind him yell, "Stop the severed pieces from reattaching. And we have to pull our weight too." Jin turns his head slightly with a focused expression. Jin's lips curl into a small smile as he thinks not bad and notes they were not all scared out of their minds. Dark viscous droplets fall from above and splatter onto the ground, forming ripples as they land. The creature's face bulges outward as glowing red eyes stare ahead, while black fluid leaks from its eye sockets and viscous tendrils writhe across its head. Jin narrows his eyes and slightly parts his lips as he says its energy just changed. The creature's upper body twists unnaturally as another distorted face protrudes from its shoulder, with its mouth hanging open. Multiple grotesque faces emerge across the creature's shoulders as it roars with its mouth wide open and red energy surrounds it. A distorted face with glowing eyes stretches across the creature's shoulder as a voice exclaims, "Huh, there's faces on the abomination's shoulders," and declares those are the golden bug sons. Long black tendrils shoot outward from the creature's body in all directions as it stands with both arms raised. Several elongated tendrils whip through the air at high speed, leaving blurred trails behind them. A tendril slams into the ground and spreads into a dark mass as a fighter recoils with his arm raised and shouts, "Damn it," while another voice yells it stole the flesh back. Several elongated tendrils rise upward from the creature's shoulders as fleshy lumps form at their tips and sway in the air. Jin launches forward through the air with his cloak trailing behind him as he extends his arm toward the mass of tendrils ahead. The creature's body fills the frame as its surface ripples and bulges with thick folds of flesh shifting across it. Jin grips his sword with both hands and brings it down as the blade crashes into the creature's body and blasts apart chunks of flesh. A distorted face embedded in the creature's body opens its mouth wide and lets out a roar as the space around it warps. Jin blocks a whipping tendril with his sword as it strikes against the blade and splashes dark fluid outward. Jin's foot slams against the ground as dust and debris scatter from the impact. Jonathan clenches his fist and shouts, "Are you alright, Jin?" while Jin turns and replies, "I'm fine, but be careful," as he warns that thing got stronger. The creature stands with its massive mouth wide open and rows of teeth exposed as a voice questions, "Was it when the golden bug's faces appeared?" and asks, "What do we do now?" Jin turns his head slightly with a focused gaze and says they just have to keep hacking away at it, and that if they keep cutting eventually only the internal core will be left, while noting the problem is its regeneration speed. Jonathan grips his spear with a confident smile and says if that's the issue don't worry, just as it got stronger, and adds they've learned its attack patterns too. Jin's lips curl into a faint smile as he says, "If you say." He raises his sword as purple energy surrounds the blade, while he declares he will slice it up to his heart's content with these mana arts. The creature looms forward with glowing red eyes and its massive mouth open as Jin rushes toward it and shouts, "Here I go." Jin swings his sword in a wide arc as purple energy trails behind the blade and multiple tendrils are sliced apart with blood spraying outward. Jin twists his body midair and brings his blade down again as the purple aura carves through the creature's flesh, leaving deep cuts across its surface. Jin's blade tears across the creature's upper body as blood sprays outward, and a voice shouts, "Stop it from regenerating," while the creature lets out a distorted cry. Multiple rapid slashes carve through the creature's flesh in diagonal streaks as its face twists and black fluid spills from its eyes. A close-up of a distorted face shows its eye widening and mouth opening as the slicing continues across its body. Jin drives his sword downward with both hands as a glowing blue core is revealed beneath the torn flesh while dark tendrils reach toward it. Jin stares forward with a glowing red eye and a calm expression as he declares it's over. Jin cleaves through the exposed core with a downward strike as purple energy splits it apart and blood bursts outward. Jonathan grips his spear while breathing heavily as another fighter behind him also pants. Claire stands beside an injured Raymond as she looks forward with a shocked expression while he sits slumped with his armor damaged. Fragments of the glowing blue core break apart and fall to the ground as pieces bounce and scatter across the dirt. The shattered core pieces lie on the ground with tendril-like extensions twitching slightly as their glow dims. A fighter raises his fist high and shouts "We won," while others behind him cheer and celebrate as a voice says to think they took down such a terrifying abomination and that their reputation is going to shoot up. Jin stands with his cloak draped over his shoulders as he looks forward, and a voice says "Great work, everyone." Jin lowers his gaze with a serious expression as his eyes focus downward. A small blue core fragment sits on the ground in front of Jin with viscous fluid dripping from its surface. A fighter runs forward with a wide grin and shouts "You rascal, you survived too," as he moves between the trees. A woman with long red hair places her hand against a tree while looking toward the group gathered in the distance. The red-haired woman leans against the tree with her hand resting on her chest, as she says the Golden Bug's sons Derek and Cedric in the end, "You were no different from your father," and softly adds "poor things." She lowers her gaze with her eyes half closed and a faint frown as she says how could they be so utterly incompetent and useless. From behind the tree she watches Jin walking away with the glowing blue core and wonders if that is the man who fought the abomination. Jin grips the glowing core tightly in his hand as its surface pulses with light, while a voice questions who is he. Jin turns his head slightly with a calm expression as a voice asks why he is taking the internal core. Jin sits cross-legged on the ground beside a small campfire while holding a cloak in his hands with tents glowing faintly in the forest behind him. He lifts a glowing blue core in his hand and stares at it with a focused expression. He brings the glowing blue core to his mouth and bites into it with his teeth visible. He squeezes his eyes shut with a strained expression. A gagged man lies strapped to a stone slab with his eyes wide in panic as Jin realizes this is someone's memory. Jin appears transparently over the strapped man while staring down at him with a shocked expression. The gagged man stares upward in fear while the masked red-haired woman stands beside him and says his father Golden Bug died because of his incompetence. The masked red-haired woman stands beside the strapped man in the stone room and tells him to show results if he wants to live while he muffles through his gag. She looks down at the man while holding a small vial and tells him to show how special he is as he muffles desperately. The red-haired woman smiles while holding a vial filled with glowing blue liquid and says she will see if he is worth joining her. She forces glowing blue liquid into the strapped man's eye as dark veins spread across his body and he screams through his gag. The man screams as black tendrils burst from his eye and blue liquid runs down his face. Jin's face tightens with wide eyes and clenched teeth as sweat runs down his cheek. A strand of saliva shoots from Jin's mouth as he spits forward. Jin rushes toward the forest clearing in a hurry as a curved trail of flames erupts behind him. Jin crashes to the ground, bracing himself as liquid spills from his mouth onto the floor. Jin hunches forward while wiping his mouth and breathing heavily as it is stated that eating an internal core can rarely grant the monster's power or make him absorb its memories. Jin looks downward with drool and sweat dripping from his face as he thinks these internal cores are full of side effects. Jin walks through the forest while wiping his mouth as he wonders if the memory came from one of the Golden Bug's sons, who turned into abominations after something was poured into their eyes. Jin stares at a small vial with blue liquid dripping from its tip, while sweat runs down his face, as it is stated that abominations are created when humans are influenced by karma, and he questions if the liquid contained karma. A red-haired woman in a dark outfit holds a small container in her hand while it is mentioned in that case. Is that woman? Jin narrows his eyes with sweat trailing down his face as he says a dark priest. Claire stands behind Jin in the forest as she says, "Jin, we need to leave now." Jin turns his head toward her with a sweat drop on his cheek as she asks, "Oh my, why are you sweating so much?" Jin raises his hand to his mouth while Claire faces him with crossed arms as she says, "What happened? And don't tell me you didn't eat another internal core, did you?" Jin lowers his hand slightly while looking to the side as he thinks about whether he should tell the others and how he could explain seeing a monster's memories as a side effect of an internal core. Jin walks ahead with a calm expression while Claire follows behind him as it is stated that saying unnecessary things might cause a misunderstanding and he says, "Don't worry, it's nothing," while deciding to keep it a secret for now. A dark figure stands partially hidden behind a tree in the forest while strands of Claire's hair appear in the foreground. The red-haired woman tilts her head slightly with a calm expression. Jin walks ahead while raising his hand mid-gesture as Claire follows beside him with tents visible in the background. The red-haired woman narrows her eyes while peeking from behind the tree. Jin stands facing Raymond and Jonathan beside Claire as Raymond gestures with his hand while speaking. The red-haired woman leans against the tree with one hand near her lips as she says, "Is he plotting something?" And to think someone who eats raw internal cores is doing the same work as the Order Alliance. She lightly touches her lips with her gloved finger as she says, "I'm curious." The red-haired woman lifts her veil with both hands while watching the group walking away in the distance as she says, "When I meet him again, will we be allies or enemies?" A tall rocky cliff rises behind several freshly placed graves marked with swords planted into the ground. Raymond grips the hilt of his sword, while another sword remains planted in a grave as Claire clasps her hands in prayer and Jin stands behind them with others gathered. A shadow stretches across a grave marked by a planted sword as it is said, "I offer my prayers to E, the god of harmony." Raymond stands with both hands on the sword as he says, "Rex. He was braver than anyone, he dedicated his entire life to peace." The scene widens over the graves and forest as he says, "Please watch over him so that this life's passing is not in vain." Jin looks forward with a calm expression, as it is stated that even though they only dueled once he looked young, and it is a shame. Raymond turns his head slightly with a sharp gaze. He looks up with widened eyes as he shouts, "Wait, is that?" Raymond tilts his head up toward a glowing silhouette of a wolf standing on top of a tall rock as someone exclaims, "A red wolf." The red wolf stands firmly on the rock with its glowing blue eyes and tendrils lifted as a low growl echoes. Raymond drops to one knee while gripping his large sword planted into the ground, and his cloak flares around him as he declares, "I give thanks." He kneels with one hand over his chest while holding the sword as Jin beside him looks down and asks, "What are you doing all of a sudden?" And he replies, "I am expressing my gratitude for the comfort of E, the god of harmony." The red wolf tilts its head back with its mouth wide open in a yawn as it exhales, while the statement is made that the red wolf is considered the closest companion of E, the god of harmony. Raymond keeps his eyes closed with one hand gripping the sword and the other resting on his chest, as it is stated that the appearance of a red wolf means E is comforting them. He suddenly turns his head toward Jin while keeping his sword planted as Jin leans back in surprise and says, "That's just my pet mutt though." While Raymond shouts, "Blasphemy, how dare you call a red wolf a mutt? Furthermore, that monster is not a species that can be tamed." Jin stands beside Raymond while looking forward with a calm expression as he thinks, "He doesn't believe me," and says, "Hey, mutt." He stares forward with glowing red eyes and a serious expression as he says, "Stop acting out and come here." The red wolf jerks its head forward with its ears raised and eyes wide as it lets out a startled cry. The red wolf launches off the rock and dives downward with its body stretched forward and claws extended as debris scatters from the cliff. The red wolf lands heavily on the ground in front of Jin with its front paw raised and body lowered while Raymond behind him reacts in shock and says, "What? It's true." Raymond stands facing forward with a tense expression, as it is stated that the red wolf is a monster that even the Order could not tame, and he says, "How could a mere individual?" Jin stands calmly while holding the red wolf's paw in his hand as he says, "Oh, I just killed a werewolf, and it's been following me ever since." Raymond tilts his head slightly with a confused expression as he says, "What is this guy?" He turns his head to the side with a serious gaze. The red wolf stands beside a stone grave with its eyes half-lidded and mouth slightly open while a sword is planted upright in the grave nearby. Jin turns his head slightly as he listens while Raymond asks, "Jin, may I ask you a favor?" Raymond stands with the red wolf behind him and looks ahead as he says, "If the red wolf doesn't have a name, please name it Rex." He faces forward with a stern expression as he says, "For one, taking a monster that our order considers sacred and calling it mutt is a bit inappropriate." Jin stands quietly with his head slightly lowered while Raymond grips his sword and says, "Secondly, with the single-minded resolve to purify the entire demonic realm, I wish for Rex's will, which fought against the evil, to not end here." A hand tightly grips a sword stained with blood against a dark surface, as it is stated that he did not let go of his sword until the very end. Raymond closes his eyes while holding his sword upright in front of him as he says, "Please, let that red wolf carry on his legacy under the name of Rex." Jin looks upward with a neutral expression as the red wolf's tail passes behind him, and he thinks, "Rex's legacy." The red wolf lifts its head slightly with its eyes half open while Jin looks toward it and asks, "Are you okay with that?" The red wolf turns its head sideways with a narrowed eye and a low breath leaving its mouth. Jin tilts his head with a faint smile while saying, "In that case, I will name him Rex." Raymond faces Jin with softened eyes and a gentle expression as he says, "Thank you." An elderly man steps forward using a cane as Raymond turns sharply with widened eyes and says, "Oh my, did this old man appear at a bad time?" The elderly monk walks forward with a cane while another monk follows behind, and Raymond faces him and says, "Elder." Jin looks toward the approaching elder with a serious expression as the thought appears, if he's an elder, doesn't that make him one of the highest authorities in the area? The elderly monk stands upright surrounded by a glowing golden aura, as the title identifies him as the elder of the third pioneer city, Bo. Several pairs of boots step forward across the dirt ground. A group of men in armor and cloaks moves forward together. Raymond stands facing the elderly monk with one hand resting near his chest while a crowd gathers behind him and he says, "Welcome, elder." Bo leans slightly on his cane while facing Raymond and says, "I apologize for visiting during such a grieving time," as Raymond responds, "Not at all, elder, what brings you here though?" Bo turns his head slightly with a serious expression and says, "I've come because an investigation is needed regarding the deaths of the Golden Bug Sons." Raymond looks toward the elder and says, "Hold on." Jin stands with narrowed eyes in front of others while looking toward the elder and Raymond says, "Do you still think their deaths were the work of these people?" Jin looks forward and says, "Wait, were we under suspicion? I guess it makes sense. The clients died while we were transporting their massive fortune, so it's only natural to suspect the mercenaries." Raymond faces the elder and says, was my evidence not enough? As the elder responds, no, it was plenty. Bo turns his head slightly with a stern expression and says, however. He stands beside Raymond while facing Jin and says, as to how they ended up turning into abominations, nothing has been revealed yet. Bo leans forward gripping his cane while facing Jin and says, I can smell the stench of a dark priest all over this incident. He turns his head toward Jin while looking down at him and asks, what do you think, Jin? Jin stares ahead with a tense eye as his expression sharpens and thinks, he knows my name. Don't tell me this guy. He faces forward and says, are you suspecting me of being a dark priest? Bo stands still with a calm expression in silence. The scene shifts to an arena, identifying the place as the third Pioneer City Vritra Arena. An empty arena interior stretches out with wooden platforms, stairs, weapon racks, and lit torches along the walls. Jin stands ahead while the monk stands with his cane behind him and says, people who are as strong as you usually show their talent from a young age. Bo stands still and says, but you just appeared out of nowhere one day and started pulling off one massive feat after another. He lowers his head and says, and on top of that, you coincidentally got involved in the abomination incident. He stands with his hands behind his back while Jin looks down at him as he says, don't you think that's highly suspicious, even to yourself? Jin turns his head slightly and thinks, I guess people around here keep tabs on who's strong. Well, in that case, it makes sense why I might seem shady, especially since I'm not from this world. His glowing red eye narrows with a tense, focused look as he thinks. Jin stands at a distance facing the elder and Raymond while speaking and says, what does that have to do with me sparring with you, elder? As it states he cannot understand it. Raymond looks toward the elder while speaking and says, he's right, elder, besides, that mercenary just got out of a battle not long ago, so his body isn't in perfect condition. Jin stands with his back turned and thinks agreed, while the elder faces him calmly and says, so what? Bo looks down with a stern expression and says, are you saying you're refusing to cooperate with the investigation? Raymond stiffens with widened eyes while standing beside Jin and thinks he's completely unreasonable. Jin looks to the side with a tense expression while thinking, what do I do? I can't just beat up a man who suspects me of being a dark priest, all because I am strong. Bo's face remains calm and unreadable as the thought continues, plus, fighting an old man might be a bit too troublesome as well. The elder stands with his cane dropped beside him while saying, you seem to have a lot on your mind, are you worried just because I'm old? He stands upright as a golden aura surrounds his body and says, I appreciate the thought, but there's no need, the reason I rose to the position of elder. His sandaled foot strikes the ground with force. Bo stands close and thrusts his glowing palm toward Jin while saying was purely due to my own strength. Jin jerks his head back and grits his teeth while thinking he's fast. Bo's hand slices forward through the air while his prayer beads swing. His strike connects with force as a spiraling shockwave surrounds Jin while he performs Great Bell Strike. Jin's face twists in pain as blood sprays from his mouth. His body slams into the wall beside a burning brazier as debris scatters outward. Raymond looks forward with a shocked expression and shouts, Jin, while stating that the Vritra monks are martial artists who possess incredible combat strength. Jin rises from the ground while covering his mouth with his hand as dust surrounds him, and it states that the elder is the strongest among them. Bo stands forward cloaked in a swirling golden aura with one fist pulled back as he declares, you must not let your guard down even for a second. And adds, Raymond, aren't you being a bit biased? He slides low across the ground while he says, if you keep taking his side. Jin recoils with a bloodied mouth after a blow to his stomach while it states, this old man might get jealous and lose control of his strength. Bo's palm slams into Jin's torso with force. Jin pushes the elder away with his hand mid-strike. The elder stands with fingers slightly curled as a golden aura surrounds him. Jin stands with blood on his mouth and looks forward as he thinks he caught the blade with his bare hands. And that hurt a lot. He also hit the exact same spot the abomination got me. His eyes widen sharply as he stares ahead in shock while thinking, no, wait a second. Jin grips his sword and scans his body with a startled expression as he thinks, my body is completely healed. And those injuries from fighting the abomination should have left me bedridden for at least 2 weeks, no. An image shows a monstrous arm colliding with his raised sword as the impact bursts outward. He stares at his hand with blood on his lips while thinking even the damage from that attack just now is slowly healing. And don't tell me. A grotesque open maw looms behind him as he faces forward with glowing eyes while thinking, did eating that monster core give me the abomination's regeneration abilities? He tilts his head slightly with a grin as the declaration appears. This is a total jackpot. He swings his sword at the elder while the elder raises his arm and deflects the strike, and he jerks back. Bo clenches his fist as a golden aura surrounds him while he says, you call this being injured from battle? And you sure know how to get an old man fired up. He smiles faintly beneath his blindfold as a golden aura surrounds him while saying, I'd love to spar with him some more if allowed, but I can't go acting so childishly. His palm strikes Jin's chest with a heavy impact as debris flies outward while he says, now that I've confirmed the rumors about your strength, it's time to move on to the next step. Bo raises his hand to his blindfold as a golden aura surrounds him while he says, namely, using my mind's eye. A glowing circular symbol rests on the elder's blindfold as a golden aura surrounds his head and body. Jin stares forward with widened eyes as a large glowing circular symbol shines in front of him. Bo presses his hands together in front of his chest as dark streaks run from his eyes and says, "Emptying oneself is the way to become truly one with yourself. And I gave up my two eyes for the mind's eye to open, my third eye." Jin faces the elder as a large glowing circular symbol radiates between them while the elder stands calmly and says, "It is an eye of the heart that pierces through to the essence of the soul." Jin's face appears tinted in deep blue as he stares forward while the elder says, "Now show me, Jin, whether you are a dark priest or a rising new light." A green monstrous creature with elongated limbs and a gaping mouth stands hunched in a dark void. A green creature with long limbs looms forward in a dark void. A grotesque surface covered in numerous red slit pupil eyes glares outward intensely. A glowing golden circular symbol radiates in darkness as a commanding voice declares, "Begone, you beasts, get back." A sandaled foot steps into shallow water creating ripples as it moves forward. Bo stands in a misty forest clearing as he turns his head in alert silence. His face tenses with sweat forming while he says, "My goodness, is this?" He stands surrounded by multiple shadowy beasts with glowing red eyes towering around him as the space forms Jin's mental world. Jin taps the elder's shoulder with a sharp jolt as his body reacts to the contact. Jin leans forward with his hand slightly raised toward the elder and asks, "Are you all right, elder?" As it is noted, he is unable to sense Bo's mana. The elder breathes heavily with sweat running down his face as he says, "A mental world that goes beyond unpleasant and straight into terrifying. This is the first time I've seen something like this." The elder's face is covered in sweat with a tense expression as he thinks, still, his mental world hasn't completely collapsed, so it means he's not a dark priest in that case. Jin stands facing the elder as the elder presses his palms together at his chest, and Jin calls out, "Elder." Bo turns slightly with his palms together and says calmly, "I apologize, Jin. Please forgive this old man for his rudeness." Verifying whether you were a dark priest or not was incredibly important, while Jin looks at him in confusion and says, "What's this all of a sudden?" Jin stands with Raymond behind him and a girl at the open doorway as a voice says, "It is because I wanted to entrust you with a quest related to the dark priests." Jin turns his head to the side with a serious expression and says, "You are." A girl steps forward across the ground as she says, "It's a pleasure to meet you." The girl stands facing forward with a calm expression as she says, "I am Cindy, the youngest daughter of the Golden Bug." The forest stands still as leaves sway and rustling echoes around the trees. Cindy walks ahead on a forest path as Jin and the elder follow behind her while she says that this is not the first time an abomination has appeared. She looks forward as she says that recently, with the third pioneer city as the epicenter, many people have been turning into abominations, and even the surrounding forests are rapidly becoming corrupted into the demonic realm. Jin turns his head to the side with a tense expression. His eye widens sharply as a voice says, "We have arrived." Jin and the others look forward as several figures in white robes kneel ahead around a massive purple rift core, emitting a glowing light in the forest. A large pulsing mass with multiple tendril-like extensions and glowing cores spreads outward as it is identified as a rift core, an object that spreads the demonic realm and turns surrounding areas into it. Three robed figures kneel with their hands pressed together as they pray, "Have pity on us and bestow mercy upon this land." While golden light surrounds them, the robed figures remain kneeling with hands clasped as glowing particles drift around them while they say, "We offer our prayers." Three masked figures in dark robes extend tube-like devices toward the rift core as streams of water spray onto its surface. Several robed figures kneel and continue praying, while masked figures spray water onto the pulsing rift core as bright golden light surrounds it. Jin faces forward with a focused expression as he says, "Purifying a rift core does not seem to be an easy task." He lowers his gaze slightly as he says, "But was not the power of karma supposed to weaken the further you get from the Northern Empire?" While Cindy beside him responds, "Yes, you are correct." Jin turns his head slightly with narrowed eyes as he says, "So for something like this to be happening." Cindy turns her head forward with a firm expression and says, "Yes." She looks ahead as she says, "It means there is someone behind it." Jin stares forward with a hardened expression as he thinks, "A dark priest." Cindy walks ahead while Jin follows behind her as she says, "If the number of abominations and rift cores continues to increase at the current rate, the third pioneer city that we worked so hard to build will face great danger." The elder walks beside Jin while saying, "And in the worst-case scenario." The elder tilts his face upward as he says, "We could lose the entire city." He stands with his cane while facing Jin and Cindy on the forest path as he says that is why they meticulously tried to find the Dark Priest's hideout and have finally found the suspected location of their base. He raises his head slightly as he says, "So with that said." The elder looks toward Jin and says, "Would you join us in the extermination operation in 2 weeks?" As Cindy stands nearby and adds, "We will compensate you with the highest level of pay." Jin holds a focused gaze as he thinks, "So this is what they wanted to hire me for." He looks toward the elder and Cindy as he thinks, Bo, the elder of the third pioneer city, and Cindy, the only left descendant of the golden bug. His lips curl into a faint smile as he thinks, a request from such big shots, have I finally been acknowledged? Jin looks forward with a confident smirk forming on his face. Dark clouds stretch across the night sky above. A wide grassy field spreads outward as Teresk stands along a path while a voice says, do not even mention it, I was so worried, you know. Jin walks beside Claire as she says, if you are framed as a dark priest, death is a given, followed by, and I heard they brutally torture you too. He glances sideways with a tense expression, while a spiked iron torture device stands behind him and he says, they would torture me. Claire clasps her hands together with a bright expression as she says, we have finally arrived. While Jin stiffens slightly, Jin looks forward with widened eyes and says, so that is. A distant fortified city stretches behind tall walls and open fields as it is identified as Wall City Yuigis. A massive city spreads outward as narration states, incomparable to the pioneer cities, but the safest place in this world. Jin looks forward with a calm expression as he wonders if he will be able to live here someday. Jin looks at Raymond standing beside Teresk as he acknowledges that now is not the time and calls out to Raymond. Raymond turns his head sharply with a stern expression. Several people sit and lean against the Teresk while resting on the ground as a voice says everyone will take a short break before moving on. A wide view shows multiple people gathered around the Teresk, some resting while others stand in place. Jonathan leans toward Jin with a shocked expression as he shouts what you are leaving for the third pioneer city as Jin responds, yes, I got a new request. Jonathan looks at Jin as he says, but that is so sudden and adds that going separate ways after a job is done is how it goes in this business, but it is always a bit sad. Jin looks ahead with a calm expression as he says, indeed you are right, and asks what will all of you do now. Jonathan smirks and gives a thumbs up as he says, well, I guess I will have some drinks and then drink some more, while another voice adds same here. Jin turns his head toward Claire while holding his bag and says, what about you, Claire? Claire closes her eyes with a faint smile and says, well, I guess I will have to look for another job, and he asks, did you make enough money this time? Claire faces Jin with a composed expression as he looks back at her, and she says it was a decent payout, but she is still far short of the money she needs to go to the magic tower. Jin looks at Claire with a slightly surprised expression and says the magic tower. Claire turns her head slightly with a gentle smile and says, I call myself a mage, but in the end I have just gathered common knowledge, so my skills are barely past the beginner level. She walks beside Jin with a soft expression and says, well, it is not like I have a problem making a living right now, it is just that I got greedy and I want to learn higher class magic. Claire stands smiling as a grand library-like structure rises behind her while she says that is why she is saving money to attend the magic tower and that you can learn higher class magic there. Jin looks to the side with a thoughtful expression as he thinks is the magic tower like a magical university and adds and earning money just to study that is admirable. He tilts his head and murmurs softly. He stands and opens his bag as Claire beside him watches closely. Jin lifts a tied pouch in one hand and looks at Claire with a faint smile as he asks, will this be enough? The pouch hangs slightly open with coins inside as he says this should be enough to help you get to the magic tower. Claire raises both hands with a startled expression as she says, what, no way, I could not possibly be that shameless, how could I accept that? Jonathan stands behind Claire with a serious expression as Jin holds the pouch and Claire looks at him while he says, I am not just giving it away for free. I am giving it because I am indebted to you, Claire, consider it a gift. Jonathan scratches the back of his head with a wide grin as he says, that is a huge amount. Claire looks forward with a conflicted expression as she says, still for me too. She looks at him in surprise with widened eyes as Jin extends his hand and places the pouch into her grasp. Jin turns his head toward Claire with a faint smile as he says, I will see you again. Claire stares forward with wide eyes and flushed cheeks as she remains silent. A close view shows Claire's lips pressed together as her cheeks remain flushed. Claire's hand grabs Jin's cloak tightly from behind. She holds his cloak while standing close to him under the trees and she says, thank you, Jin. She looks forward with a determined expression as she says, I will definitely repay this favor. Jin looks back with a calm expression as his eyes soften in silence. He stands facing the group and says, take care, everyone. Claire clutches the pouch to her chest as Jonathan waves beside her with his eyes closed. Jin turns his head away with his cloak shifting slightly. He walks forward with his head lowered as the group stands behind him watching. Rex lies stretched out in the grass while Raymond stands nearby looking down at him. Raymond looks toward Rex with a softened expression as he gently calls out Rex. He holds a faint smile with his eyes relaxed while looking ahead. Jin walks toward the city with Rex beside him under the sunset sky as Raymond says, take care too, Rex. Jin walks forward past armored guards beneath the stone wall. He carries a sack over his shoulder while turning his head slightly to the side. The elder monk stands on the wall beside Cindy and she says, you said nothing would happen, but seeing you come out here like this, you must be worried. The elder keeps his head forward while Cindy looks ahead and says, what are you talking about? And she replies, what do you mean I'm talking about that mercenary? Cindy narrows her eyes slightly as she says, you said it yourself, elder. She looks at him with a composed expression and says, "That Jin seems to have eaten a monster core." The elder remains still with his face tense and stays silent. His mouth tightens beneath his blindfold as he says, "Just because he ate a monster core, it doesn't seem right to consider him a dark priest." He stands facing forward as Cindy looks up at him with a sharp expression and says, "You're saying something incredibly dangerous. If you eat a monster core, you become intoxicated with power and lose your sense of self. Isn't that basic common sense?" Cindy closes her eyes and she says, "Elder, no master, please tell me honestly," and says, "Do you still hope that that guy still has his humanity left and that's why you're protecting Jin?" The elder stands still while looking forward with a steady expression. A short-haired figure appears wearing a beaded necklace and lifting a mask over his face. The elder lowers his head with a heavy expression as he remains silent. Both stand on the castle wall facing ahead and Bo says, "I don't really want to have that conversation." Cindy's lips tighten and she says, "I apologize if I was disrespectful, but keep this in mind." She steps down from the box and walks away while saying, "I'll keep it a secret for now, but if Jin does anything wrong, I will frame him as a dark priest." She turns her head slightly with a cold expression and says, "If that happens, you who recommended Jin won't be safe either, elder." She walks forward across the stone wall as the elder stands behind holding his cane. The elder lifts his head slightly and says, "Don't worry, that won't happen." Dark silhouettes of monstrous creatures loom around a figure standing beneath them as he says Jin has consumed numerous monster cores and become unimaginably strong, yet his mental world remains intact. The elder lowers his head with a firm expression as he states this is proof that one can maintain their humanity even after eating monster cores. Armored guards walk with spears as he says the world is not ready to accept Jin yet, so he is keeping this fact a secret. He stands alone on the wall beside a fluttering flag as he says, "I'm certain." Jin walks forward while glancing to the side as the narration states the power that young man possesses. He walks forward while looking to the side as the narration states it will bring great hope to this world. Rows of armored soldiers march forward with spears raised as flags ripple in the wind. A line of soldiers advances in formation with steady faces while moving together as the force is identified as the 1st Expeditionary Force. A soldier in the front walks forward holding his spear as he says, "Just as there is a time to love and a time to hate, if there is a time for peace, there is a time to fight." Two spear tips clash midair with a sharp impact as they strike together. Several soldiers march with spears in hand as one says, "He pointed to my hands and commanded me to hold a sword." A spear slams into the ground as dirt bursts outward. A soldier walks forward holding a spear while speaking and saying, "And pointing to my heart, he said, to annihilate evil with faith." Jin strikes his own forehead with a stone as blood splashes across his face with a pained expression. He stands still holding a blood-stained stone as nearby soldiers stare at him in shock. The blood-stained stone drops from his hand and hits the ground. Jin looks down with blood running down his face as he calmly counts, 596 597, while a soldier reacts in confusion and says, "What's with that guy?" His forehead splits open revealing writhing flesh beneath as he counts, 598 599 600, while blood pours down. The exposed wound visibly regenerates as the flesh closes and reforms. Jin touches his forehead with his hand as he states that he obtained the special ability regeneration after consuming monster cores, and that healing a simple bruise took about 10 minutes. His blood-streaked face looks forward as he states that the fracture he received from the abomination healed in 2 days. A faint smile forms on Jin's lips with blood trailing down his cheek as he says, "Then." Jin looks at his hand with a bloodied face and says that if his arm gets cut off he wonders if it can regenerate within a month, followed by, "Yeah, this is why I eat monster cores. I want to try using it in actual combat right away." He stands facing a soldier as he hears, "I heard your nickname is Head Crusher. Was that about crushing your own head?" Jin lifts his hand to his head while looking at the man and says, "I apologize if I startled you," and says that there was something he wanted to try out. An armored man stands confidently while looking at Jin, as he is identified as the Expeditionary Force Supreme Commander Roland. Roland gestures casually toward Jin while smiling and says, "No, I like geniuses like you. Geniuses are supposed to be completely messed up in the head." He points at Jin with a smirk as Jin says, "Genius." And he replies, "I'm talking about you. You're a mercenary recommended by Elder Bo, so you must be an incredible genius." Jin stares forward with a tense expression as he says, "What's with this guy calling me a genius? I don't really want to get close to him," and says, "More importantly, what's our plan?" Roland turns his head and says, "Spoken like a true genius, you're impatient." He gestures with one hand and says they are heading to the forest north of the 3rd Pioneer City and will first clear out the rift cores ahead before moving into their center as Jin stands behind him. A distant view of the forested area and rocky terrain appears as he says they will not know the exact duration of the battle until they arrive, but their goal is to finish within 10 days. Jin looks to the side with a calm expression and says that the forest should not be that big and asks if 10 days would be too long. Roland raises a finger with a confident smile and says, as expected of a genius, yeah, normally that would be a long time. The ground bulges behind the soldiers as he says, but a large clawed monster lunges through the air with its mouth wide open behind Roland as Roland looks forward and says that because of the rift cores the monster's territory has expanded. A soldier in a helmet shouts, "Commander," while Jin stands beside him looking forward. Roland grips the hilt of his sword at his waist and pulls it out. He swings his sword in a wide arc as the blade cuts through the lunging monster, and blood bursts from its body midair. Roland looks forward with a confident grin and says that those who usually live deep within the demonic realm are appearing out in the open like this, so 10 days is actually a short time. The ground bulges in multiple directions as several creatures rush toward them. Several armored soldiers recoil and stumble back while holding their spears as the ground bulges around them and one shouts, "Ambush! Everyone prepare for battle." A monster lunges forward with its mouth wide open as it rushes toward the soldiers. A soldier is bitten by multiple monsters as blood sprays from his body while he cries out in pain. Jin, with blood on his face, looks alarmed and thinks, "Leech rats. Have those guys always been able to dig underground?" Roland shouts urgently, "Keep your backs covered while you fight. If you show your back to them, you're dead." Several armored soldiers brace with their spears as multiple leech-like monsters swarm from all directions and lunge at them. Roland raises his sword mid-swing with a shocked expression as he looks at Jin. He shouts with urgency, "Hey genius, watch out." His eye widens in shock as he registers the danger. Jin is surrounded as multiple creatures leap at him from every direction with claws outstretched. They lunge at him as he lowers his head, overwhelmed by the swarm. Jin keeps his head lowered as multiple leech rats surround him with open jaws and raised claws closing in. Roland reaches forward with a shocked expression and shouts, "Hey, what are you doing? Are you crazy?" Jin grips a short blade and drives it into a leech rat's body as blood bursts from the wound. He bites into the leech core as blood sprays across his mouth. Jin clamps his jaws onto several leech rats as blood sprays across his face. His eye widens and glows red as he thinks, "If I eat all of these guys, wouldn't I be able to inherit the leech rat's abilities? I don't really think I need the ability to dig underground, but..." He bites into a glowing core with a bloodied grin as he thinks, "This is a problem. The monsters right in front of my eyes only look like monster cores to me." Jin grips a core embedded in a creature's flesh. He bites into a leech rat's body as blue fluid splashes across his mouth. He stuffs a glowing core into his mouth, while surrounded by lunging beasts as inheritance occurs when consuming a monster core with a very low chance of gaining that monster's skill. Jin holds a dripping blue core in his hand, as it is revealed that this is the real secret to how I survived in the demonic realm for 12 years. He tilts his head with blood smeared across his face and exhales. Jin stands surrounded by leech rats and says, "I am starting to get full. I think I have eaten about 40 of them now. Should I have gained a digging ability by now?" A hand reaches toward him from above as beasts recoil with open jaws. A knight reaches out with his arm raised toward Jin as beasts crowd around him and shouts, "Mercenary, are you all right?" Jin stares ahead with wide eyes and a bloodied face and shouts, "What are you doing? It is dangerous. I am fine, so maintain your formation," and thinks, "What the? I cannot secretly eat monster cores like this." The knight grabs Jin and pulls him away while moving at speed as he says, "Do not worry, we are safe." A group of robed musicians strike drums and play string instruments as glowing notes swirl around them and the holy choir performs. Roland plays a violin with a calm expression as glowing musical notes spiral around him. A hooded musician draws a bow across a large string instrument behind another choir member. Roland tilts his head with a slight smile while playing. Armored knights stand with spears as leech rats lunge at them while one shouts, "I am overflowing with power," and another commands, "Slaughter them all." Jin looks forward with a shocked expression as glowing musical notes drift around him, and he realizes the soldiers' stamina and defense have increased significantly while questioning if they are receiving buffs from the holy songs. Roland tilts his head while playing the violin as glowing notes swirl around him, and Jin realizes he is actually a supporter. A knight shouts with his mouth wide open as others behind him stand charging forward. A leech rat is struck midair as blood sprays while soldiers advance and the command echoes, "All troops, it is time to counterattack." The full moon hangs in the night sky above the tree. A pile of dead leech rats lies on the ground as an announcement states they will record performance and asks everyone who participated in today's battle to gather around. A knight holds a megaphone and a paper while speaking toward the group as he explains the recorded results will reflect their rewards and asks for cooperation. Two men sit near a small fire beside tents as one looks toward the other and says, "Seriously, I just cannot figure him out," smashing his own head with a rock, charging right into the middle of the monsters. Jin kneels inside a tent and digs into the ground as dirt scatters while someone asks, "Why are you digging in the dirt?" He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and frowns as he says, "Did I really not gain the digging ability? while adding, gaining an inheritance definitely requires luck. Roland stands nearby and looks at Jin as he asks, Jin, is your body doing all right? And Jin turns toward him. Jin glances back with a calm expression and says, I am sorry if I startled you earlier. Roland smiles slightly as he replies, not at all, your fighting today was impressive, and adds, honestly, when you jumped right into that horde of monsters, I thought you were going to die. Jin looks at him as Roland continues, but you proved yourself with the results in the end, and asks, I heard you hunted 267 leech rats all by yourself. Two men rest near the tent as one cleans a spear and says, the average soldier only took down 4 or 5, while even the holy knights were only around the 100 to 150 mark. Roland tilts his head with a faint smile as he says, I guess prodigies really are different. Jin turns his head and thinks, prodigy my foot. If I had just focused on hunting instead of stuffing my face with monster cores, the numbers would have been completely reversed, and says, by the way, Roland. He places a hand on his chest while looking toward Roland and asks, were you part of the support force? Roland leans forward with a confused expression and says, what about it? And adds, are you looking down on supporters? Jin lifts his hand slightly while calmly explaining, I just thought you were someone interested in raw power, so I was just surprised since it was not what I had expected. Roland closes his eyes and coughs into his fist with a bead of sweat on his face as he says, well, you saw right through me. He crosses his arms and looks aside while admitting, in my heart, I am the kind of man who wants to wield a sword too, as Jin gestures toward him and says, then should you not just wield one? And Roland continues, the thing is. Roland lowers his gaze with a serious expression as he says, the reason the Order Alliance fights is for peace. Two figures stand before several graves under the moonlight as Roland explains that countless people have lost their homes and are dying because of the demonic realm, and that in a world like this, he chose the role where he could be of the most help. Roland smiles with his eyes closed and gestures with his hand as he says his swordsmanship is only slightly better than average, but his musical skills are considered top tier even within the Order Alliance. Jin stares forward as he thinks that when Roland kept talking about prodigies, he assumed he would be annoying. Roland smiles warmly as the narration states that he seems like a much more decent person than expected. The night sky stretches over the camp with the full moon shining as a voice asks if he can show his performance sometime, and another replies with a laugh saying yes sure. Two flags flap in the wind against the dark sky. A view of the camp shows soldiers standing near tents as the narration states 1 week later. The camp tents stand under daylight as the narration explains they advance into the demonic realm while destroying numerous rift cores and encountering kobolds and large-eared monsters. Roland stands at the head of the table facing the group as he states that the deeper they go the stronger the monsters become and asks how the soldiers' morale is. A soldier in armor gestures with his hand toward Roland as he reports that they are far more spirited than when they first started, while another voice hesitates saying well, and Roland responds pardon. A group of kobold monsters charge forward with weapons raised. Jin swings his sword in a wide arc as multiple monsters are cut apart, and their bodies are thrown into the air with blood spraying. A massive rabbit-like monster with glowing red eyes lunges forward as Jin braces below it with his sword raised. Jin slashes upward with his sword as blood bursts across the frame. He bites into a glowing blue core. Jin grips the core in his hand while looking toward it with blood on his lips and says, damn it, another dud. Roland looks ahead with a serious expression as a voice says that mercenary is taking care of every single monster as soon as they appear. Roland smirks slightly as he exhales. He throws his head back while laughing loudly at the table as the others stand around him, and asks if getting outdone by a single mercenary hurts the pride of the Order Alliance. A stern armored man folds his arms and gestures forward as he says this is not a laughing matter, and that the soldiers are far too relaxed, and he is going to claim a massive amount of the performance rewards. Roland looks forward calmly as he says a good thing is a good thing, and thanks to him they barely have any casualties, and that stronger monsters appearing means their destination is close. A view of the camp shows tents and flags under the sky, as a voice says they should rest while they still can. A deep canyon stretches downward between tall cliffs. Several figures stand on top of tall stone pillars rising from the canyon depths. A masked figure with a single eye symbol looks forward while asking if the Order Alliance is on their way. He stands on a stone pillar in the canyon as he looks to the side and asks how those people found out about this place. He stands atop a pillar facing a veiled woman below as she looks ahead and says we planted many rift cores around here, and it would be stranger if they had not grown suspicious. The woman closes her eyes calmly as she says she still believes their youngest anticipated this much when she made her move. She opens her red eyes and smiles faintly as she says their chosen youngest sibling could not possibly be that incompetent. Figures stand on tall stone pillars in a canyon as a lone man in a wide hat looks up from below. The man in the hat crouches on the pillar with one knee bent as he looks forward and says not to worry since the defenders always have the advantage over the attackers. He lowers his head under the brim of his hat with a slight grin, as he says the enemy's reaction was only slightly earlier than expected. He lifts his head and places a hand on his chest, and says either way it will not interfere with the great plan of darkness. Roland stands in front of the soldiers and looks down with a tense expression. Thick white webs stretch across the canyon walls as a distant figure looks up and says what this is. A wide view shows the canyon covered in massive web strands, while a formation of soldiers stands below as someone questions what kind of madness this is. The canyon is filled with layered webs stretching between cliffs, as large spiders move along the strands below. Jin stares into the web-covered canyon and says something about this entire place feels wrong. He explains that while fighting from the high ground is normally advantageous, digging a deep hole to build a hideout makes no sense for standard defense. Roland suggests they might have been trying to avoid exposure, but Jin quickly counters that if that were the case, they should have just dug a hidden tunnel instead. Roland struggles to understand why anyone would build a fortification in such a position. Jin narrows his eyes toward the canyon below and quietly warns that this whole place could be a trap. Roland's expression immediately stiffens in confusion. A sudden thunderous impact shakes the ground as both of them look back at the same time. A violent shockwave erupts across the battlefield, throwing soldiers into the air like toys. Massive demonic beasts burst out from below, and terrified voices immediately recognize one of them as a Bigfoot. The enormous monster towers over the battlefield, while a giant snake beast coils around its body. The Bigfoot's immense strength alone makes it a disaster-class threat, while the Salmosa carries deadly venom and armored scales. Bigfoot raises its massive hand high, then slams its fist into the ground as soldiers scatter in complete panic. Its hand slides beneath a massive chunk of earth. Bigfoot roars and hurls soldiers into the air. The knights can do nothing but scream as they fall helplessly toward the canyon below. They're thrown deeper into the pit with no way to stop themselves. One terrified knight turns around just as a giant spider crawls toward him. Right behind him, a massive spider looms with glowing red eyes and gaping jaws. And he screams in pure terror. Desperate and frantic, Roland watches his men fall into the pit and orders everyone to ignore the chaos and focus on the Bigfoots first. Panicked voices call for the Holy Choir to cast support buffs, while warning that the Bigfoots are far too massive to handle normally. Meanwhile, Jin only grins and tells them to bring it on. A massive foot crashes into the ground right in front of him, shattering the stone beneath it. Bigfoot lunges toward Jin alongside Salmosa while he watches without flinching. A crushing punch blasts Jin backward as the massive creature drives its fist straight into him. The nearby knights freeze in shock the moment they see him get sent flying. Roland's face pales as he desperately screams Jin's name in panic. But this beast isn't just any monster. It's the largest and strongest of the pack, with the massive serpent wrapped around its arm. Jin only smirks and reminds the creature that it picked the wrong opponent. Without hesitation, he dives into the deep canyon with his blade drawn as the massive Bigfoot jumps after him. As he falls, Jin drives his sword into the canyon wall to slow his descent, then sprints along the wall at impossible speed. He plants his foot against the stone and calmly watches rubble and debris rain down around him. Bigfoot uses the webs to descend into the canyon at terrifying speed. Jin dodges the monster's attacks as he realizes the beast combines overwhelming strength with incredible mobility. At close range, Bigfoot's raw power alone is enough to crush almost anyone alive. And the moment the giant serpent lunges forward and spits deadly poison, Jin deflects it with his sword. But that only makes him smile wider. Because abilities like these are exactly what he's been looking for. Even while falling through the air, Jin stares at the monster with excitement and calls it absolutely delicious. His body crashes straight into a giant spider web. Jin kicks off the web and drives himself downward. He twists through the air and slams his feet against the canyon wall, then strikes the giant serpent midair, forcing the massive creature deeper into the canyon. Purple energy wraps around Jin's hand as he calmly explains that monsters fighting together don't just combine their strength, they multiply it. Jin rushes toward the falling monster and reveals that creatures like this all share the same weakness. Bigfoot crashes onto the canyon floor as Jin explains that fighting two bodies at once is difficult even for him. He dives down with purple energy covering his blade and points out that monsters struggle just as much moving as one. His eyes lock onto Bigfoot as he calmly explains that teamwork eventually falls apart under real danger. Bigfoot bares its fangs in fury while Jin explains that once monsters feel threatened enough, instinct takes over everything. That instinct erupts immediately as Bigfoot's fist crashes straight into the snake's head, while Jin cuts past its body. Blood explodes everywhere as the serpent's head is smashed apart by its own ally. For the first time, the giant monster can only stare in complete shock at what it just did. Purple energy surges across Jin's blade, as he reveals that this is exactly how you hunt two monsters at once. Jin unleashes a devastating purple slash that cuts clean through Bigfoot's neck, as the creature screams in agony. Its headless body drops to its knees while blood pours from the wound. By the time the dust settles, the severed remains of both monsters lie at Jin's feet as he calmly lowers his blade. A faint smirk crosses his face as he admits, well, still, the gatekeeper was actually pretty decent. But the purple energy around him suddenly shifts, and the change immediately catches his attention. Jin slowly turns toward the corpse as a strange feeling washes over him. Purple energy swirls around the monster core while Jin questions why it feels so unsettling. He quickly shakes off the feeling and reaches down to grip the glowing blue core. With his back against the stone wall, Jin quietly consumes it as faint vibrations spread through the cavern. Suddenly, dark purple power erupts around his body, and the shock leaves him completely speechless. That's when he realizes the monster's ability has been absorbed directly into him. He stares at his hand and wonders if he can now tell which monster cores carry inheritances after devouring so many of them. A grin slowly spreads across his face as he realizes just how massive this reward really is, and prepares to test his new ability. A massive fireball suddenly rushes straight toward him, leaving him frozen in shock. The canyon erupts with violent explosions as the blast engulfs him in flames. A sinister laugh echoes through the canyon, while a mysterious figure watches with a jagged grin. The man in the hat stands beneath the massive explosion as his laughter echoes through the cavern. He sneers at Jin for relaxing inside monster territory and calls the human completely pathetic. But the mocking expression instantly disappears. A burning figure stands inside the flames while the enemy stares in disbelief. Stone-skinned Jin emerges from the fire and says, "It's a failure." Surrounded by flames, he sighs in disappointment. "Here I hoped I would get the poison ability."
The dark priest watches as Jin stands surrounded by flames. Surrounded by fire, Jin studies the stone, like cracks covering his body. Smirking, he says that even if the ability is not what he wanted, it still seems pretty useful and wonders if the new ability really did block the flames after all. Staring at the approaching fireball above him, he adds, "It's an ability worth looking into further," but his hand tightens around the sword hilt. The massive fireball bursts against his blade in a wave of flames. Grinning through the heat, Jin says the fight is not over yet. Staring at Jin in shock, the dark priest realizes his attack was blocked twice. Jin rushes through the canyon with his sword raised as the dark priest wonders if he is the insane hunter rumored to consume monster cores while living among humans. The dark priest lowers his head and mutters, "F so." Massive black spider limbs spread behind him as he says he will have to go all out too. The giant spider limb clashes against Jin's blade in a burst of sparks. The impact tears across the canyon wall while Jin is thrown backward. Staring ahead in silence, Jin recognizes it as an inheritance ability. Surrounded by towering spider limbs, the dark priest grins, and Jin wonders if he gained that skill by consuming the core of a spider monster. The dark priest grins and says he has been wanting to face him, never expecting him to just show up like this. His red eye narrows as he says he is so thankful he could cry. Several spider monsters race across the canyon walls above him. Staring at the monsters in shock, Jin realizes the dark priest was not alone. Fire and green energy surge through the canyon as the spider monsters attack from above. Jin raises his sword against the massive wave of flames and green energy crashing toward him. Wrapped in flames, Jin stares ahead and recognizes the overwhelming firepower. A massive explosion erupts across the canyon in a wave of fire. An explosion erupts behind Roland as he turns in shock. Eyes shaking, he calls out Jin's name. Wrapped in flames, Jin remains standing in the middle of the burning canyon. The dark priest stares ahead with a grin and calls it excellent, bracing himself against his sword. Jin's cracked stone skin holds together as the dark priest wonders if someone who survived that blast can still be called human. Chunks of Jin's stone covered body crumble away beside his sword. Jin studies the flames around him and realizes the poison gas combined with the fire created a much stronger explosion, even against his stone skin. Half of Jin's face remains covered in cracked stone as he admits dark priests are not enemies to underestimate. The dark priest suddenly lunges toward Jin as he stares at him in alarm. Jin blocks the incoming strike as the spider, like limbs close and around them, grinning beneath his hat. The dark priest says, "Let's see." Spider limbs crash down around Jin as the dark priest asks how well he handles close quarters combat. The glowing red eye beneath the hat locks onto Jin while multiple strikes slam toward him at once. Jin grimaces as he blocks the spider limb slashing at him. Purple energy coils around Jin's sword as he swings at the incoming attack. Jin swings upward with a sword wrapped in swirling purple energy, smashing into the spider. A massive fire suddenly rushes toward him from behind, catching him off guard. A burst of green poison gas erupts through the burning chamber, triggering another violent explosion. Engulfed in flames, Jin shields himself as debris and fire crash around him. Jin grits his teeth, thinking that dealing with the spiders first might be the only option, but the dark priest makes that nearly impossible. He realizes the fire has severely damaged his internal organs, and both his regeneration and stone, skin abilities are reaching their limit. The Dark Priest rushes through the flames with a grin, launching another attack. Pinned low behind his cracked stone arm, Jin thinks, now all I can do is... A spider limb slashes downward with incredible speed. The sharp limb drives straight into Jin's body, unleashing a massive spray of blood. Jin's sword slips from his hand and crashes onto the ground. A grin spreads across the Dark Priest's face. Black spider limbs pin Jin in place, while the Dark Priest bursts into laughter. Staring down at the wounded Jin, the Dark Priest calls him intriguing, and says he finally understands why they left Jin alone. Blood pours from Jin's body as the Dark Priest praises him for blocking the attacks with a crude skill, and even using mana arts, calling him too valuable to kill. Blood erupts from multiple slashes across Jin's body as the Dark Priest coldly mutters, "Very well." Kneeling in a pool of blood, Jin listens as the Dark Priest says he has a special offer for him. Spider limbs surround the Dark Priest as he offers to spare Jin's life if he joins the Dark Priests. Blood covers Jin's battered body as he stares back in silence. A twisted grin spreads across the Dark Priest's face as he says it should not be a bad offer for him since using skills is what makes Jin special anyway. Spider-like limbs spread behind the Dark Priest as he warns Jin that ordinary humans will keep trying to suppress that power. Looking at him with cold eyes, he warns that once he uses it, they will try to kill him while calling him a Dark Priest. A cold flashback crosses Jin's mind as the Dark Priest says the Order Alliance only accepts him because they still do not know he uses monster core abilities. Jin stands beside the Elder while the Dark Priest asks if anyone would still see him as human once they discover the power of monster cores. The Dark Priest reaches out his hand and tells Jin to join forces with people in the same situation. Grinning beneath his hat, the Dark Priest promises Jin even greater power if he joins them. Jin sits amid the flames, heavily injured and breathing roughly, blood dripping from his mouth. Jin curses under his breath. Looking down, he fires back by asking why a fucking clown like him talks so much. The Dark Priest freezes in shock as Jin says this will not do, and that he needs to be taught a lesson. A red glow begins spreading across Jin's face as he quietly admits he really did not want to use this. His eye turns red while dark energy cracks across his face, and Jin says, "But you leave me no choice." Flames burn across the canyon floor. A violent shockwave tears across the floor. Dark energy suddenly rises around the Dark Priest as he stares forward in confusion. Dark crimson energy erupts from Jin and lightning, like streaks that engulf the entire area. The Dark Priest throws up his arm in panic and stammers, "No." His eyes widen in shock as he stares at the power surrounding Jin. Red energy tears across Jin's body while pale scales spread over his skin. Standing inside the storm of dark energy, Jin tells him to at least say something that makes sense. A massive wave of red energy erupts through the canyon, while the Dark Priest braces himself. With red eyes glowing through the scaled armor covering his body, Jin asks how a wolf could ever serve a dog. Red lightning reflects across the Dark Priest's face as he stares at Jin's transformed body in disbelief, wondering what that form is and whether Jin had been hiding this power the entire time. Red energy spreads around the Dark Priest as he orders his children to turn Jin into ashes. Red energy crackles across Jin's face as he activates heavenly punishment. Standing alone at the center of the canyon, Jin raises one hand as a massive wave of red energy erupts around him. Spider-like creatures crawl across the canyon walls as crimson lightning tears through their bodies. Red lightning fills the canyon wall in a violent surge. A massive blast of red energy crashes down onto the Dark Priest. The Dark Priest stares at the red lightning surrounding him in shock, realizing the gap in power between them is far greater than he imagined and wondering what kind of monster core gave Jin this strength. Wrapped in red energy, Jin lunges forward through the canyon at blinding speed. The Dark Priest screams in pain beneath the storm of red lightning. Burn marks cover the Dark Priest's face as he realizes staying there is too dangerous and decides to run immediately. Jin suddenly appears behind the Dark Priest, leaving him shocked. The Dark Priest turns around in shock, unable to understand when Jin got behind him. Jin grabs one of the spider limbs, still gripping the limb. Jin rips it from the Dark Priest as blood bursts from the torn wound. Jin tightens his grip around another limb with crushing force. The Dark Priest screams as Jin tears through the spider, like limbs behind him in a spray of blood. Blood bursts from the Dark Priest's back as he screams in pain, still surrounded by red lightning. Jin watches as the Dark Priest flees with blood trailing behind him. Shaking with fear, the Dark Priest begs Jin to stop and desperately tries to talk things out. Terrified, the Dark Priest argues that both of them consumed monster cores and could still build something mutually beneficial together. Jin stands over him in silence while red lightning flickers around his body. Looking down with glowing red eyes, Jin says the only help he can offer is information about the other Dark Priests. The battered Dark Priest screams at Jin, demanding to know why he is siding with humans when they both use the same power. Jin's glowing red eye narrows as he coldly says that still doesn't answer his question. Sweat streams down the terrified Dark Priest's face as he hurriedly promises to do everything Jin asks. Jin pierces through the Dark Priest's body with his arm in a burst of blood, keeping his expression calm. Jin tells him he only gets one chance. Red lightning erupts from Jin's attack as it blasts into the Dark Priest. Blood runs down the Dark Priest's face as he glares back and curses Jin. Wrapped in crackling red energy, Jin watches the Dark Priest turn to dust. Fragments of Jin's scales break apart and fade fade away. Blood drips from Jin's mouth, while the scales around his neck continue crumbling away. Covering his mouth with one hand, Jin quietly lets out a weak breath. Jin's battered body slowly falls forward. A shockwave spreads across the crater while Jin lies motionless at the center. Breathing heavily against the ground, Jin admits that using this ability is exhausting. Blood runs from Jin's eyes as he says this is exactly why he never wanted to use that power. The canyon blurs in Jin's fading vision as he realizes he can't fall asleep here. Through his blurred sight, Jin notices a group rushing toward him from the distance. Staring through half-open eyes, Jin weakly recognizes Roland's face. Relieved to see Jin alive, Roland tells the others to bring a stretcher immediately. Sweat runs down Roland's face as he quietly calls out Jin's name. Standing beside Jin's collapsed body, Roland stares at the massive scars covering the canyon wall and wonders what kind of battle happened there. The third pioneer city comes into view. Morning light pours through the quiet room. Jin slowly opens his eyes beneath the blanket as sunlight pours across the bed. Sitting up in the dark room, Jin lets out a quiet breath. Looking down at his hand in disbelief, Jin realizes he actually survived. A maid freezes at the doorway in shock as she notices Jin awake. Rushing through the hallway, the maid loudly announces that the mercenary has finally woken up. Roland bursts into the room with panic written across his face, shouting that Jin is awake. Sitting on the bed, Jin asks what happened while Roland reveals that he was unconscious for 3 entire days. Hearing that, Jin realizes even his new regeneration ability couldn't prevent the severe backlash, then asks if the expedition is already over. Standing beside the bed, Roland reassures Jin that most of the surrounding rift cores were handled and that the expedition suffered very few casualties. With a relieved smile, Roland thanks Jin and tells him everything worked out because of his help. Smirking back at him, Jin jokes that they should repay him with a generous reward, while thinking that being acknowledged never gets old. Before the conversation can continue, the door suddenly opens and a man steps inside. Introducing himself as a representative of the Order Alliance, the man says he came to collect Jin's testimony about the expedition. Staring down at Jin, the investigator asks what kind of opponent he fought and demands every detail about the battle. Jin pauses in surprise, clearly cautious about revealing too much information. Adjusting his glasses, the investigator explains that they need proper records, because the battlefield was far too chaotic for anyone to understand what truly happened. Staring down at Jin, the investigator admits they still can't believe the battle was supposedly fought between a human and a monster. Jin forces a faint smile while wondering if he's still being treated as a suspect, bitterly thinking that the happy ending didn't last long. Keeping his expression calm, Jin quietly wonders what kind of lie he should come up with now. The elder Bao steps into the room and calmly says he'll handle the situation himself. The investigator looks at the elder entering and calls out, "Elder." The investigator turns toward the elder in confusion and questions what he means, but the elder cuts him off and asks if he wasn't clear enough. A red aura fills the room as the elder coldly says, "I said, get out." Startled beside Jin's bed, the investigator quickly stammers, "Understood." Clouds drift quietly across the sky outside the window. Through the glass, the elder sits alone beside Jin's bed after everyone else leaves the room. Forcing a cautious smile, Jin thanks the elder and says he was worried there might have been a misunderstanding after waking up, while thinking the old man has been interested in him since their first meeting. The elder calmly tells Jin not to worry. Reaching into his robe, the elder says that no matter what form Jin takes, he's decided to trust him. Jin stares up at him in confusion as the elder suddenly pulls out a glowing blue core. His eyes widen as he realizes what it is. Blue energy burns around the core as the elder reveals it's a monster core. The elder explains that it came from the body of the dark priest Jin killed. Jin's eye tightens in shock as the elder admits he secretly slipped the core away. Placing the glowing core into Jin's hand, the elder says that for some reason, he had a feeling Jin might want it. As his hair is being cut, strands fall from Jin's shoulders. He tightens the glove around his hand. Standing in fitted armor, Jin listens as the elder says that it suits him quite well and asks if he can feel it. Looking down at the armor, Jin says it's beyond just being comfortable, and that it feels like the fabric has become one with his body. Resting a hand on the shoulder plate, Jin remarks that he would have tailored his clothes from the start if he had known they were this good. The elder laughs and says the true value of those clothes isn't their comfort. Jin turns and asks, "Pardon." Golden energy suddenly erupts behind him. A glowing fist closes in on Jin, leaving him staring at it in shock. The elder's palm strike slams into Jin's chest as golden energy erupts on impact, drawing out a strained "Kuf." Staring wide-eyed, Jin thinks, did this old man just punch someone who was in a coma for 3 days? His eye narrows in confusion as he pauses and thinks, wet, but, looking down at himself, Jin says he can barely feel anything, and the elder explains that the armor is a relic. The armor is shown surrounded by blue light as a relic, is described as a rare and expensive object imbued with magic. Leaning on his staff, the elder explains that while it weighs little more than beast hide, it possesses defensive power comparable to plate armor. Resting a hand on the armor, Jin asks if relics like this aren't expensive, and the elder replies that they're difficult to obtain, no matter how much gold someone has. Entering the room, Cindy reveals that this relic is part of the reward for the mission, worth a total of 400 gold coins. A chest packed with gold coins and bars is opened, revealing the reward. Staring at the overflowing chest, Jin asks in disbelief, 2,400. Is it really okay for you to give me this much money? Standing before him, the elder says he earned it through the monsters he hunted, the Rift Core, and dealing with the Dark Priest, adding that his contributions are far from ordinary. Cindy calmly adds that she also included a little extra herself. A bead of sweat runs down Jin's face as he thinks that for a job this big, the reward is unbelievable. Looking at the elder and Cindy, he asks why they're treating him so well, noting that excessive kindness is always suspicious. His expression turns serious as he says, "You too, even though you know that I consume monster cores." The elder and Cindy look at him in silence as the room grows tense. The elder strokes his beard and lets out a small laugh. An exterior view of a large building appears as the elder jokes that he still gets grief even when he treats the young man well. Under a bright full moon, 2 guards stand watch beside a torchlit checkpoint. One guard yawns while the other asks if something just moved, only to be told it was probably just the wind. The uneasy guard insists that something definitely moved as the other starts to dismiss it. A chain suddenly whips around a guard's neck, stopping him mid-sentence. The chain digs into his throat as he lets out a choked gasp. A cloaked figure yanks the chain, ripping off the guard's head. Chains whirl around the blonde man as blood splatters and a grin spreads across his face. Facing the blonde man, the remaining guard recoils and shouts, demanding to know who this attacker is. A blood-stained iron ball slams into the guard's head, sending his helmet flying through the air. The moonlit cliffside hangs silent for a brief moment. The blonde man holds a blood-stained iron ball, as his 2 companions stand beside him. Staring ahead, the veiled woman remarks that being defeated by such incompetent fools is hard to believe. The battered face of a dark priest appears as she calls him their youngest, Ench. Standing over the rubble, the veiled woman coldly says he was complete trash. Glancing back at the veiled woman, the blonde man says there must have been enemies stronger than the low-level knight standing guard. The masked man dismisses it, saying it does not really matter since he expected Ench to lose anyway. The 3 figures stand beneath the cliff as the masked man says Enchi's defeat was as far as their plan was meant to go. Blue energy circles the masked man's head as he places a hand against the rock wall and suggests they should get moving as well. A glowing blue symbol appears against the stone, shining brightly with magical energy. Lines of glowing blue runes spread across the cliff. The masked man faces a massive glowing formation as blue runes spread across the wall. The glowing runes stretch across the cliffside, filling the area with blue light. The masked man raises a hand and declares that it is time to begin their plan to wipe out all humans. Rows of restrained people lie on stone slabs as their screams echo through the chamber. A bottle filled with glowing blue liquid sits among medical tools and supplies. The scene shifts to a large illuminated building beneath the night sky. Seen through a tall window, the elder begins explaining what he means. Standing around a table, the elder tells Jin that while he cannot reprimand him, he does have a favor to ask. Looking directly at Jin, the elder asks him to use his formidable power for the sake of humanity. Holding a teacup at the table, Jin reflects that he once feared being tortured if anyone discovered he consumed monster cores. Jin reflects that instead of condemning him, they asked him to use his power to help humanity. A faint smile appears on his face as he admits he can only feel grateful now. Turning toward the elder, Jin asks whether anyone else knows his secret and learns that only the 2 of them do. As he listens quietly, Cindy explains that others likely would not have reacted the same way, and Jin agrees. Leaning forward in his chair, Jin asks how exactly he can help. The elder places a glowing blue core on the table and reveals that it belongs to the dark priest. Standing over the table, the elder explains that consuming a monster core can sometimes grant the monster's memories, though the chance is very low. The elder adds that if the monster core came from someone who was originally human, the odds of gaining those memories increase significantly. Jin recalls seeing the memories of Golden Bug Sons before and realizes that was why it happened. Holding the core, Jin asks if they want him to consume it and find information about the Dark Priest. Standing beside Cindy, the elder leaves the decision in Jin's hands. The blue core rests in Jin's palm as he reflects that he not only found people he can speak with comfortably, but also gets the monster core he missed before. Purple energy curls around him as Jin grins and says he has no choice but to eat the monster core, for the greater good, of course. He bites into the blue core. A towering spire fills the sky as a voice declares, "I want to be chosen too. I don't want this shitty life as a failure." On a balcony, a kneeling man cries out that he wants true and overwhelming power. A frightened man stares upward as a voice asks, "Is that so?" Holding a glowing blue vial, the woman calmly tells him to prove it. Jin's eye narrows as he processes the memory unfolding before him. The elder and Cindy look down at Jin as they ask if he is alright. Seated on the bed, Jin says he learned something as the others react in surprise. Sweat runs down Jin's face as he reveals he learned about the Dark Priest's next plan. A grand mansion stands beneath a cloudy sky. Walking along the stone path with the elder and Cindy, the elder asks if he is certain, and Jin firmly replies, "Yes, I'm sure," leading the group forward. Jin says the battle was only a smokescreen while the Dark Priests carried out a different plan. Holding a sealed letter, Jin reveals that the target is a long, standing tradition held after an expedition ends, as an image of armored soldiers crosses his mind. The elder and Cindy fall silent as Jin warns that the Dark Priests plan to raid the Archbishop's banquet and wipe out the high-ranking officials there. A massive horned shadow with glowing eyes looms over the mansion, its enormous hand reaching toward it. Still walking with the others, Elder Bo says that if it is the banquet, its security should already be substantial, and asks whether their military strength is really at that level. Jin replies that he could not see their exact scale, but, as Jin mentions a man wearing an iron mask, A memory of the figure standing behind the elder appears. The masked woman appears in Jin's memory behind Cindy as he notes that the woman tied to the Golden Bug's sons' deaths was there as well, and that those two combatants seemed very strong. Bao strokes his chin in thought while quietly considering the plan to raid the banquet. Looking ahead with a serious expression, Cindy warns that in her opinion the situation is too dangerous to handle alone and suggests informing the Order Alliance and canceling the banquet immediately. Jin and the others stop in place as Bao firmly rejects the idea, declaring, "That won't do." Elder Bo explains that reporting the matter would reveal Jin's ability to consume monster cores, and they could end up being accused as the Dark Priests instead. Walking together through the garden, Elder Bo adds that canceling the banquet could simply force the enemy to switch to a backup plan, leaving them back at square one. Turning his head toward the others, Jin asks, "Then, what should we do?" Standing beneath the open sky, Bao says they must make use of the information Jin has given them. The elder lifts his head and declares that if they already know the rats are coming, then all they need to do is set a mousetrap. Night falls over the city as a brightly lit castle rises above the rooftops. Inside the banquet hall, elegantly dressed guests gather beneath a massive chandelier. Wrapped in a dark cloak, Jin walks among the crowd and quietly surveys the hall. As Jin walks through the banquet, nearby guests recognize him as the mercenary from the expedition who played a major role, though some remark that he looks younger and less impressive than expected. Two women gossip behind a fan, repeating rumors that he becomes a beast once battle begins, while another jokes about approaching him. Hearing someone call out, Jin turns around with a questioning look. Roland throws an arm around Jin's shoulders and excitedly greets him as the star of the expedition, teasing him for only showing up after the battle was over. With an arm still around Jin's shoulders, Roland laughs that he thought Jin had died. Smirking beneath the embrace, Jin asks Roland if he was actually worried about him and apologizes, saying everything became too hectic. Still leaning on Jin, Roland admits he was worried and says that battle was no joke. Leaning closer, Roland's smile fades as he asks what is really going on, while Jin looks back in confusion. Roland glances toward the upper floor and remarks that their genius seems to have a tail following him. A blond man watches from a balcony while sipping a glass of red wine, and Roland identifies him as an inquisitor. Turning his gaze toward the balcony, Jin remarks that the man must be working hard if he suspects him simply for being too strong. Gesturing casually beside Jin, Roland apologizes on behalf of the gloomy Order Alliance members who never even joined the expedition. Roland flashes a grin and tells Jin not to be too upset about the suspicion surrounding him. Looking ahead calmly, Jin listens as Roland says that the fact he fought for many people does not change, and Jin replies that he truly appreciates it. A heavy rumble echoes from the banquet hall doors. As guests turn toward the entrance, someone announces that the Archbishop has arrived. A robed clergyman descends the grand staircase while an attendant follows behind. The newcomer is introduced as Archbishop Conrad. Smiling at the gathered guests, Conrad is greeted as the Archbishop and asks whether everyone is enjoying the banquet. Wearing a warm smile, Conrad says the gathering is for all of them and hopes everyone enjoys themselves. Jin stands quietly beside the elder, observing his surroundings. The elder turns his head slightly, his expression growing more serious. Watching the banquet closely, Jin thinks the atmosphere has reached its peak and decides it is time to prepare for the enemies he expects. Under the moonlit sky, several hooded figures overlook the brightly lit mansion from a hillside. Wrapped in dark cloaks, the Dark Priests advance together through the night. Inside the banquet hall, a knight rushes toward Archbishop Conrad and shouts that there is a problem. Conrad turns toward the knight and calmly asks what the problem is as the messenger struggles to explain. The armored messenger urgently reports that a massive swarm of abominations has appeared at the city's north gate. Archbishop Conrad's expression hardens in shock as the report sinks in. The massive gate buckles under countless impacts. A huge swarm of red-eyed abominations pours through the breach. Guests throughout the banquet hall react in alarm, shouting that abominations have invaded and demanding to know what is happening. A faint smile appears on Jin's face as he remains calm amid the commotion. Seated with Jin and Cindy, the elder notes that no matter how sudden their attack is, fighting all the knights stationed at the banquet would be physically impossible for them. The elder states that in that case, there is only one move they can make. They will create a disturbance somewhere in the city. Keeping a composed expression, the elder explains that forcing the troops to scatter would create an opening to attack the banquet hall itself. Archbishop Conrad throws out an urgent order, demanding that the troops stop the abominations at any cost, even if forces must be pulled from the banquet. The elder explains that preventing the troops from scattering is the most important part, but since the banquet is under the Archbishop's authority, he has no power to command the troops. Holding a teacup calmly, Cindy says she will handle that problem herself. A faint smile forms on her face as she says they must act before the knights are swayed by their numbers. Several glowing objects cling to the tower wall beneath a lit window. The objects flare brightly as a voice declares that the banquet hall only needs to be blown up first. A massive explosion erupts from the building. engulfing the structure in fire and debris. Chunks of the ceiling crash down into the banquet hall as panicked guests shout that the ceiling has suddenly collapsed. The armored knight raises his sword and shouts for the knights to protect the officials, while the frightened guests crowd together behind him. Cindy stands amid drifting smoke and debris, staring down with a startled look. Watching the scene, Jin notes that the plan succeeded because the knights never left their posts. Several cloaked figures race across the rooftops. The distant banquet hall burns from a bright explosion as the figures stop and look toward it in confusion. Staring at the blast, one man asks if the explosion was part of their plan. A faint smile appears on the woman's face as she wonders if their enemies already knew they were coming. A gloved hand grips a weapon as blue light flashes across the frame, throwing off his cloak. Jin walks down the corridor with a large blade in hand. His red eyes glow as he smirks and declares,
"It's time to catch the rats!"
Flames rise from the castle's upper floors as three cloaked figures watch from a rooftop. Among the cloaked group, one person notes that it seems their enemies knew they were coming and wonders if there is a traitor among them. The masked man decides to stop the operation here, telling the group to fall back and plan their next move. The blonde man shouts that he finally got fired up only for everything to end like this, and calls the situation incredibly annoying. His expression tightens as he suddenly notices something. The blonde man blocks the incoming blade with his chain. A dark figure leaps between the buildings toward the rooftop. Jin leaps toward the rooftop, confronting the blonde man. He lands on the rooftop and confronts the dark priests. Standing confidently, he says, "Easy to get in, but hard to get out." The woman recognizes him as the man from the Golden Bug Sons incident, then suddenly pauses, eyes wide with shock. She blurts out, "Was it you? Our plan was leaked because of you, wasn't it?" A swirl of golden energy streaks across the night sky, drawing everyone's attention. Wrapped in a spiraling golden aura, Elderbow drives a powerful strike into the dark priest. The elder calmly says, "It's been a while, Vikram." Vikram stares ahead in silence, only managing to say, "You're." As Elderbow and Jin stand together, Vikram recognizes Elderbow in shock. The cloaked group turns their attention toward them. Looking ahead, Jin asks if he knows that man, and he replies that they share a terrible connection. Lowering his head, Elderbow reveals that Vikram is a Vritra monk, and more importantly, a disciple of his. Vikram falls silent for a moment. He then scoffs at the word disciple, questioning whether Elderbow is still clinging to those pathetic memories. His hand grips the cloak tightly as he continues, saying it doesn't matter whether those memories belong to the past. He throws the cloak aside, adding that it makes no difference in the present either. Vikram touches the mask covering his face and remarks that he still knows exactly how to get under his skin. Staring at him, Jin realizes he is using the same mind's eye technique that Bo once used and admits that he didn't notice it at first, but can now clearly sense its mana. He wonders if that ability is connected to the monster core he absorbed from the Dark Priest. Bo raises a hand and calls out to Jin. He then tells him that he will leave the other two opponents to him. Wrapped in blazing energy, Bo and Vikram charge straight at each other. Both figures surge toward each other through a storm of force. Their attacks collide, unleashing a violent shockwave across the rooftop. Wrapped in chains and grinning wildly, the blonde fighter cheers that this is exactly what he wanted, while the woman challenges Jin to show what he can do. Beneath her hood, the woman's eyes glow as they transform. Sharp claws emerge from beneath the flowing cloak. The woman transforms into a massive panther atop the rooftop. Holding his sword, Jin reflects that their transformation abilities and overwhelming strength would have caught him off guard if he had come unprepared. A faint smile crosses Jin's face as he notes that he already understands their abilities through Enoch's memories. From across the street, Jin identifies one remaining problem as a nearby heresy inquisitor. The inquisitor peers from behind a wall as the warning focuses squarely on him. The blonde man sends his massive mace hurtling toward Jin. As the mace tears through the air, Jin notes that he can't use the abilities of the monster core in this fight. Sparks burst as Jin's sword knocks the incoming mace aside, acknowledging that limitation. Grinning with excitement, the blonde marvels that Jin deflected the mace with a sword. His red eyes narrow as he prepares to continue the attack. The transformed panther charges forward with its claws extended. As Jin swings his blade at the panther, it slashes at him and insists he won't be able to dodge the next attack even if he sees it coming. Blood sprays from Jin's body as he realizes the situation could become troublesome. His expression shifts into a grin. He reflects that the pressure of this battle feels just like the nightmare he endured 12 years ago. To him, these restrictions are nothing more than training weights. With a red glow in his eye, he says it has been a long time since he actually felt like fighting. A shockwave erupts from the rooftop. Vikram and Bo clash, sending shockwaves across the rooftop. Calmly raising a hand, Bo tells him that his habit of overcommitting his body and chasing novelty over what he was taught has never changed. Vikram presses his hand forward as he dismissively calls that mindset old-fashioned. Bo faces the incoming strike at close range as he continues that this is not stubbornness. Vikram attacks with his elbow and declares that it is called individuality. Vikram's attack unleashes a spiraling shockwave, sending Bo flying away. Bo steadies himself on the rooftop after the impact. Quietly repeating the word individuality, he admits that he once wanted to support that path. Standing across from Vikram, he says that a new path is always difficult, but sometimes it can create miracles. Vikram listens in silence as Bo begins. The only problem is lowering his head. Bo warns that his impatience and excessive greed have tainted that individuality. Facing each other across the rooftops, Bo warns that dirty tricks built on lies are bound to collapse eventually. A glowing golden symbol spins into existence as he tells him to listen well. More golden symbols bloom across the sky. Surrounded by radiant symbols, he declares that this will be his final lesson and reveals a technique called Mind's Eye, the all-seeing eye. Vikram recognizes the technique, noting that it can only be used after reaching the highest realm. Touching his face, he admits the old man has grown stronger since they last met. Pressing against his mask, he says that strength is exactly why the old man is no good. An orange gold symbol swirls before him as he begins. Unlike what you said, in this world. Seeing this, Bo is left shocked. Surrounded by glowing golden symbols, Vikram reveals the technique Mind's Eye, the all-seeing eye, and declares that a perfect lie eventually becomes the truth. The mark on his forehead suddenly glows. Shocked, Bo asks in disbelief, "How can you use that?" Glowing symbols spread across the rooftops as Vikram and Bo faced one another. Surrounded by the shining marks, Vikram calmly asked why Bo seemed so surprised and whether he had really believed he was the only one capable of using such a technique. Rage immediately twisted Bo's expression as he told him to stop speaking nonsense. He explained that the all-seeing eye was far more than a technique for reading mana. It could also perceive blood flow and the slightest muscle movements, allowing its user to read every action. According to him, it was Vritra's ultimate technique. As Vikram listened in silence, Bo admitted that despite its incredible power, the technique was overwhelmingly difficult to use. Touching his chest, he revealed that the all-seeing eye slowly consumed the user's lifespan and called it a cruel technique. Standing across from his former disciple, Bo declared that the battle would only end when one of them died. Blood running from his mouth, he asked whether Vikram had any complaints about that outcome. Vikram calmly replied that he would not be the one dying. Bo would. Lowering his hand, Bo stared at him in silence. Orange energy spiraled around Vikram as he declared that the old geezer would not even last that long. Activating Mind's Eye countdown, he created multiple afterimages that immediately surged forward. Blood still staining his mouth, Bo answered that, if Vikram insisted, then he had nothing more to say. He activated Mind's Eye countdown as well, and countless golden afterimages spread around him before rushing into battle. The two remained standing on opposite sides of the rooftop, while their blazing afterimages clashed high above them. Orange and gold figures collided repeatedly in midair. One golden afterimage drove an upward punch as orange afterimages spiraled around the impact. The exchange landed on both fighters at the same time, causing blood to spray from their mouths. Keeping one hand raised, Vikram remarked that Bo looked like he was struggling. Bo admitted that he was certainly not what he used to be, though he also acknowledged how much Vikram had grown since they last met. Even so, Bo declared that Vikram had chosen the wrong opponent. As their afterimages collided again, Bo reminded him that he had watched him grow ever since childhood. Golden energy swirled around him as he claimed that, even if he could not maintain the technique for long, nobody understood Vikram better than he did. Clenching his fist, Bo called him a pitiful fellow and declared that his wandering would end here. The battle continued as orange and golden afterimages tore across the rooftop. Then a glowing symbol flashed overhead. The moment Vikram looked up, multiple golden afterimages closed in from every direction. Bo calmly declared checkmate. Taking a stance, Vikram immediately realized he would be forced to take at least one hit. He punched through the afterimage that appeared least dangerous, hoping to minimize the damage. However, another afterimage instantly struck him from behind. Its palm slammed into his back and sent a violent shockwave through his body. The impact burst through his chest, forcing a cry of pain from him as he stumbled backward. Then, everything suddenly went dark. Planting his foot on the rooftop, Vikram found himself standing alone in a silent void. Looking around in confusion, he wondered what had happened and quickly realized that he could no longer feel anything. Examining his condition, he understood that the previous strike alone should not have been enough to kill him. A grim realization soon followed. Had that single step caused him to lose the entire exchange? Before he could think further, countless golden afterimages rushed toward him from every direction. Frustrated, Vikram cursed and prepared himself for the overwhelming assault. A massive pillar of golden force crashed down upon him and exploded violently. Blood burst from his mouth as the devastating attack tore through his body. After slamming into the rooftop, he was launched back into the air. He eventually crashed into a crater, battered and barely conscious. As he struggled to breathe, he realized that his heart had ruptured. When Bo approached, Vikram looked up in alarm. Bo stood silently over his injured disciple for a moment before unexpectedly sitting down beside him. The sight left Vikram visibly surprised. Lying among the rubble, he looked toward Bo and asked what he was doing. Bo remained silent before finally addressing him. "You brat." With his back turned, he asked whether Vikram truly thought a master would refuse to see his disciple off, even if they had become enemies. Vikram remained silent. Staring through his cracked mask, he softly called out Bo's name. His thoughts drifted back to the past. He remembered how cold it had been on the day he was abandoned. As a child, he had clung desperately to an adult's robe while his parents left him at Vritra. No matter how much he watched them, they never looked back. From that day onward, he did everything he could to earn his master's acknowledgement. Following behind Bo through the snowy courtyard, he believed that if he ever became useless, he would be abandoned once again. Yet no matter how hard he tried, the monk never even spared him a glance. Back in the present, Vikram weakly called Bo's name and asked whether he could not have given that pitiful child even a single word of encouragement. His trembling fist tightened as he admitted that he had only wanted someone to tell him he was doing well and working hard enough. Bo fell silent for a moment before quietly replying that he had known everything. Looking toward the night sky, he revealed that he had watched Vikram wake before dawn to train and had seen him refuse to give up, even when facing seniors far stronger than himself. Then he turned back toward his disciple. However, because he believed that only the strong were necessary, he had deliberately chosen not to react. Calling Vikram a foolish fellow, Bo finally admitted the truth. He had always been his most cherished disciple. As those words lingered beneath the moonlit sky, dark smoke continued to billow from the damaged castle towers. At the same time, a black panther crossed the rooftop while a chained blonde man followed behind it. Noticing the flames flickering around Jin's hand, she wondered whether they belonged to Enoch's fire magic. A massive iron ball hurtled toward Jin as he channeled flames into it. With a swipe of his hand, he redirected the fire-infused iron ball before drawing his sword, purple mana igniting along its blade. His mana-coated sword clashed against the Black Panther's claws, sending sparks flying. Watching the battle from the rooftop, the Heresy Inquisitor was stunned that Jin was using second circle magic alongside mana arts. Adjusting his glasses, he began questioning whether his suspicion that Jin was a dark priest had been completely mistaken. A faint smile crossed Jin's face as he realized he had made the Heresy Inquisitor doubt himself. Keeping the fireball burning in his hand, Jin explained that the fire magic came from a monster core, but humans could wield that power as well. Still facing the Black Panther, he wondered how he could use that ability to defeat it. The dark priest let out a sharp breath as Jin readied his blade before bursting into laughter and mocking his confident expression. Grinning, he scoffed that a cheap trick like that wasn't enough to turn the battle around. The Black Panther charged across the rooftop while the chained iron ball rushed straight toward Jin. As it closed in, Jin poured blazing fire into the iron ball before redirecting it with a swift motion. A grin spread across Jin's face as he called the dark priest an idiot, saying that even if it wasn't an extraordinary ability, its true value depended on who was using it. At the same time, his mana-coated sword slammed into the Black Panther's claws in a shower of sparks. Without giving the beast a chance to recover, Jin immediately followed up with another upward slash from his glowing purple blade. The Black Panther's eyes widened as it realized Jin's reaction speed had completely changed. Even so, Jin knew that a single hit from either the heavy iron ball or the panther's claws could still cost him his life. The dark priest swung the iron ball again, keeping up the relentless assault. As Jin poured blazing fire into the weapon, he realized that all he needed was a single opening. He swung his blade, startling the Black Panther, knowing that would give him the chance to counterattack. Realizing Jin was catching up to its speed, the Black Panther decided it had to move even faster. Shouting excitedly, the dark priest hurled the blazing iron ball straight ahead. Jin looked up as the burning iron ball hung overhead while the Black Panther raced along it. Grinning, Jin focused on ending the fight. With a single slash, he cut through both the iron ball and the Black Panther at the same time. Blood sprayed from the panther's face as it staggered backward with a pained cry. Watching the wounded Black Panther collapse, the dark priest shouted, "Silky!" Wearing a confident grin, Jin revealed that he had been counting on their arrogance all along. He mocked them, asking if they had really believed that mace alone would be enough. The dark priest stumbled backward as Jin called them fools before charging straight at him with his sword. As he attacked, Jin shouted that iron was extremely weak against heat. The dark priest froze in shock, stammering, "This!" Looking at the battered Vikram and the fallen Selkie, he quietly murmured their names before realizing they were both dead. Overcome with terror, he stumbled backward, shouting that he was scared. Still trembling, he repeated that he was completely terrified before throwing himself off the rooftop, desperately declaring that he would survive no matter what. He crashed into the street below. Startled townspeople gathered around, wondering who had fallen from the sky before recognizing him as the man who had been fighting moments earlier. The dark priest let out a terrified scream. Swinging his chained mace wildly, he yelled for everyone to get out of his way, warning that they would die otherwise. Still running through the streets, he shouted that he was getting out of there. The heavy chains tore through nearby buildings, smashing walls apart and sending debris flying. As the fleeing dark priest continued, swinging the chains wildly, they ripped across the street in every direction. The townspeople panicked, screaming for everyone to run. Jin raced across the rooftops with his sword in hand, glaring at the fleeing man in frustration. His expression suddenly hardened after noticing what was happening below. From above, he saw the dark priest charging straight toward the civilians while recklessly swinging the massive chains around him. An older man carrying a young boy desperately ran as the enormous chain closed in behind them. Watching the civilians below, Jin realized that if he didn't use his full strength, innocent people would die. Meanwhile, the Heresy Inquisitor raced through the streets, as Jin realized that revealing his true abilities would also expose his real identity. Without another thought, Jin leaped off the rooftop. Red energy erupted around him as he grinned, asking himself what he was still hesitating for before declaring that he had chosen to live as a human. Still carrying the child on his back, the mustached man looked back in shock as the massive chains rushed toward them. Both the man and the child froze, staring wide-eyed at the approaching red aura. The Heresy Inquisitor also stopped in surprise as the crimson energy coiled into view beside him. The dark priest was equally stunned when the red aura surrounded him, causing him to realize, wait, this power is wrapped in swirling crimson energy. Jin landed on the ground. His expression hardened as he quietly called out, "Oi!" The dark priest hesitated before nervously replying, "Yes!" Looking past him, Jin calmly answered, "Not you," as the raging red energy engulfed the dark priest behind him. He screamed as the crimson energy consumed his body, burning away his face and revealing a skull-like visage beneath. Surrounded by crackling red energy, Jin then called out to the Heresy Inquisitor, startling him. Looking him straight in the eyes, Jin asked, "What's your judgment? Am I a human or am I a monster?" The Heresy Inquisitor could only stare back in stunned silence as sweat ran down his face. A grand mansion comes into view, where 2 armored guards stand watch at the entrance. Inside, Jin sits with his arms crossed while armed guards remain posted behind him. Bo sighs, asking how everything ended up like this, while Jin sits across the table with a faint smile. With an awkward smile, Jin admits that he used his powers, and the Heresy Inquisitor caught him. Pointing at him in anger, Bo shouts that he warned him and demands to know what he was thinking. He angrily reminds Jin that keeping his secret was a matter of life and death for all of them, then asks why he would do such a thing. Covering his mouth with his hand, Jin quietly apologizes before adding, "Well, still." Spreading his hands, he says he saved those people and jokes that since he's still alive, maybe everything will work out somehow. Bo turns away with an irritated expression and snaps that things do not magically work themselves out. Cindy calmly cuts in, saying that's enough because getting angry won't solve anything. Sipping her tea, she says that even if this hadn't happened, Jin would have been discovered eventually, since someone like him could never stay hidden forever. Slamming his hand on the table, Bao demands to know if she's saying Jin was going to die anyway, but she replies no, saying things actually worked out for the best. As the conversation shifts to the guards by the doorway, she explains that if the truth was bound to come out eventually, it was only a matter of time. Sitting on the table, Cindy declares that now is the perfect time to reveal the truth. Roland looks on with a tense expression as he tells everyone to move. Jin turns his head sharply toward him. A grand church-like building stands under the open sky. 2 clergymen turn their attention toward the entrance. Bo and Cindy quietly watch as the hearing begins. Jin is brought before a grand hall, where Archbishop Conrad sits surrounded by clergy and holy knights. Jin kneels before the Archbishop without showing fear. The man before him is introduced as Archbishop Conrad, and Jin immediately notices that his aura feels completely different from when they met at the banquet. As he studies the Archbishop's expression, he senses the deep anger of someone who lost both family and home to the demonic realm. Realizing how dangerous the situation is, he reminds himself to choose his words carefully, because one mistake could cost him his life. His hand tightens into a fist as he silently prepares for whatever comes next. Without wasting any time, Archbishop Conrad asks Jin a direct question, wanting to know if he is a dark priest. Bowing his head, Jin calmly denies the accusation. The Archbishop immediately follows up by asking how Jin was able to use the power of karma, and Jin begins explaining that he never knew monster cores were dangerous in the first place. Still bowing, he explains that long ago, while wandering through the demonic realm and starving, he copied the beasts around him and ate monster cores without knowing the danger. His explanation immediately enrages the surrounding clergy, who accuse him of mocking the Order Alliance and shout that everyone knows monster cores are dangerous. Several priests demand that Archbishop Conrad execute Jin at once after hearing him admit that he ate monster cores. Watching their reaction, Jin realizes they are rushing to condemn him exactly as he expected, but he keeps his attention fixed on the Archbishop. Instead of reacting with anger, Archbishop Conrad closes his eyes and falls into silent contemplation, making Jin wonder if his words are actually being believed. Looking ahead, Jin reasons that if the Archbishop had truly wanted him dead from the beginning, he would have sent him straight to the execution grounds instead of bringing him here. A faint smile appears on his face as he believes that if he handles this carefully, an opportunity will eventually present itself. The Archbishop suddenly orders someone outside to come in, catching everyone's attention. The massive doors swing open, and Jin immediately turns toward the entrance to see who has arrived. The arrival of the Heresy Inquisitor immediately unsettles him, as he expects nothing favorable to come from his testimony. The Inquisitor calmly looks Jin over before stepping forward to deliver his statement. Standing beside Jin, the Heresy Inquisitor swears before E, the god of harmony, that he will speak nothing but the truth. After hearing the oath, Archbishop Conrad gives him permission to begin his testimony. The Inquisitor confirms that Jin truly used the power of a monster, leaving the hall in tense silence. He adds that such power alone could become a serious threat to the Order Alliance, and declares that Jin deserves death under its laws. Hearing only accusations, Jin realizes the Inquisitor is deliberately highlighting every point that works against him. Just as the testimony seems completely one-sided, the Heresy Inquisitor suddenly pauses before beginning with a single word. However, Archbishop Conrad immediately notices the change in tone and questions what the Inquisitor means by however. The Heresy Inquisitor stuns the entire courtroom by declaring that Jin is still human despite using a monster's power. Jin is left stunned as the Inquisitor explains that, during the first expedition, Jin contributed more than anyone else and chose to save lives, even though exposing his true identity was inevitable. The Inquisitor further points out that Jin can still use both magic and mana arts, proving he has not completely lost his humanity. His unexpected defense enrages the surrounding clergy, who accuse him of taking bribes and abandoning his duty as a Heresy Inquisitor. Ignoring the shouting, the Inquisitor coldly orders them to be quiet and states that he is only carrying out his duty without prejudice or personal bias. At that moment, Bo addresses Archbishop Conrad and apologizes for previously deceiving the Order Alliance. However, he insists that Jin's unique power could become a tremendous asset to the Order Alliance if used properly. The furious priests reject the excuse before demanding to know why the elder kept that opinion to himself if he truly believed Jin's power could benefit the Order Alliance. They accuse him of hiding it from the very beginning because he suspected something was wrong all along. The elder calmly admits that something had indeed concerned him, but criticizes them for twisting his words by ignoring the full context and focusing only on isolated details to justify Jin's execution. The stunned priests immediately fall silent as the Archbishop's command echoes through the Grand Hall. Looking ahead, Archbishop Conrad firmly declares that he alone will ask the questions and deliver the final judgment. The surrounding priests bow their heads and quietly acknowledge the Archbishop's authority. Looking down at the kneeling Jin, the Archbishop confirms that his name is Kim Woo-jin, and Jin calmly answers that it is. The Archbishop unexpectedly asks Jin how strong he believes himself to be. Caught off guard by the question, Jin admits he should probably be modest, but says he cannot lie either. Meeting the Archbishop's gaze with a confident smile, he simply says that he believes he is quite useful. The Archbishop smiles in response before announcing that he has made his decision. The Archbishop declares that while mercenary Kim Woo-jin is undoubtedly a dangerous individual, judging everything he has done so far, it would be unreasonable to brand him a dark priest. In the name of Archbishop Conrad, he officially commands mercenary Kim Woo-jin to join the 2nd Expeditionary Force and fight at its forefront. Accepting the Archbishop's command, Jin is told to prove that he truly stands on the side of justice. Hearing the order, Jin questions the sudden mention of a 2nd Expeditionary Force, noting that the 1st expedition has only just ended. As he quietly remarks that the whole situation smells suspicious, the door behind him opens. A stern man identified as Duke Edwin Reventer enters the room. After the otherworldly gate opened, kingdoms across the north began falling one after another, with only the 5 kings standing against their destruction. As their chances of survival dwindled, the kingdoms poured immense wealth and armies into supporting the Order Alliance. As time passed, the kings who once ruled the continent were left with nothing but the title of Duke. Among them stood Duke Edwin Reventer, a descendant of one of the fallen kingdoms. A torch flickered against the stone wall as Bo remarked that things had changed recently. Walking through the corridor, he explained that the Order Alliance's northern expedition policy had given the lands of the 5 kingdoms new hope of being reclaimed. He revealed that Duke Edwin, a descendant of the fallen Reventer kingdom, had started showing his hidden ambition. Looking toward him, Jin asked if Duke Edwin intended to reclaim that land for himself. Bao scoffed that, after once begging to keep his life, Duke Edwin now wanted to play king again and had gone completely mad. His expression hardened as he stated that Duke Edwin knew perfectly well he had no right to claim that land. He quietly added that there was one more reason behind his actions. Stopping in the corridor, Bo revealed that Duke Edwin had poured his family's fortune into establishing the 2nd Expeditionary Force. He explained that if the expedition succeeded, Duke Edwin would gain the justification to claim ownership of the reclaimed land. Still walking down the dim corridor, he warned that the real problem was that the expedition had been formed too hastily and lacked the military strength it needed. His expression darkened as he warned that Duke Edwin's ambition would cost many lives in the 2nd Expeditionary Force. Jin quietly remarked that the situation left a bitter taste in his mouth. After a moment of thought, he realized this might be an opportunity, since if the Order Alliance truly wanted him dead, they would have already killed him instead of sending him to the front lines. Red energy flickered around his clenched fist as he decided that if he could make the mission a success, he might finally be able to stop hiding the power of the monster cores. Letting out a quiet breath, he wondered if the 2nd Expeditionary Force was really that dangerous. A grin spread across his face as he declared that perhaps it was dangerous before he joined it. With a weary look, Bo said Jin was as carefree as ever and that he had expected that answer from him. Stopping in the corridor, he warned that even for Jin, this expedition would not be an easy one before offering him something that might prove useful. Jin's eyes widened in surprise. Resting in Bo's hand were 2 glowing monster cores taken from the Dark Priests. Staring at the cores with a grin, Jin asked how he had managed to sneak them out. Before Bo could continue, someone approached from down the corridor. Looking towards Cindy, Bo simply said they had borrowed a little of her influence. With a smile, she remarked that gold coins could be surprisingly useful. Letting out a dry laugh, Jin admitted that her financial power was truly on another level before suddenly noticing something missing. Holding the 2 cores in his hand, he pointed out that they had fought 3 Dark Priests and asked what had happened to the last one. A torch crackled against the stone wall as the group stopped outside a prison cell. Behind the bars lay the Dark Priestess they had fought earlier, bound and left alive. Jin immediately moved to deal with her, but Cindy quickly stopped him, revealing that she had intentionally kept the woman alive. Fixing her gaze on Jin, she explained that killing the Dark Priestess now would only leave them empty-handed. Standing beside him, she stated that she was prepared to use any means necessary to extract information from her. Looking toward the imprisoned woman, Jin asked if that meant torture if it came down to it. A bead of sweat formed on his face as he quietly repeated the word to himself. Standing before the cell, he called out to Cindy, but as she told him not to mention it, if he was going to say it was too harsh or something, he cut her off before she could continue. Staring through the bars, he instead asked what would happen to her monster core if she died during the interrogation. A grin crept across his face as he hesitantly asked if he could make a request of his own. Cindy paused for a moment before quietly responding. She agreed to preserve the Dark Priestess's core and hand it over to him. Moments later, Jin left the city behind and headed alone down the forest path. Walking beneath the trees, he turned his attention to the cores of the Golden Bug Abomination and Enoch. Looking at the blue monster cores, he noted that because they had once belonged to humans, there was a good chance they contained useful skills. The image of a previous absorption flashed through his mind as he remembered that consuming those cores also meant inheriting fragments of their memories, which took a heavy mental toll. Staring down at one of the cores in his hand, he wondered if eating several at once might cause him to lose his sense of self. His expression hardened as he considered whether it would be safer to consume only one for now and save the rest for later. Standing alone in the forest, he abandoned that thought and called out for Rex instead. The forest rustled as Rex came into view. As Rex padded through the grass, Jin wondered if feeding one of the cores to him might be worth a try. Resting a hand on Rex's head, he grinned and teased him for having such an easy life lately. Rex suddenly stiffened and glanced back as something caught his attention. 2 wolves emerged from the forest with bared fangs and aggressive growls. Rex bared his teeth at the newcomers, while Jin wondered what was wrong with those mutts. Rex let out a furious roar as he glared directly at the wolves. The 2 wolves froze in place, their faces twisting into visible panic. A moment later, both wolves flipped backward. The 2 wolves rolled onto their backs before Rex. Staring in disbelief, Jin remarked that the 2 wolves were acting exactly like Rex and began calling out to him. Rex proudly lifted his head as Jin joked that he must have become the ruler of the entire area while he was away. Smiling warmly, he praised him for a job well done. He patted Rex and jokingly reminded him that only he was allowed to scold him, warning him not to get beaten up by anyone else. With a grin, he decided that Rex deserved a reward for his efforts. Holding out one of the glowing cores, he told Rex to absorb it carefully since it was a valuable one. Rex immediately bit down on the core, eyes widened in shock. A powerful blue aura erupted around Rex's body as Jin hurriedly asked what he was feeling. Rex let out a thunderous roar. His transformed foot stomped the ground. The transformation continued with another thunderous howl. The 2 wolves looked up, visibly uneasy. Watching the transformation with a grin, Jin remarked that Rex had gone completely crazy. Bathed in blue energy, Rex towered over Jin as he marveled at his enormous new form. Before Jin can react, Rex's tail wraps around him and lifts him into the air. Landing securely on Rex's back, he grins, clearly impressed. Looking over Rex's massive body, he declares that it's finally the perfect size to ride and wonders just how fast it can run. Rex digs a massive paw into the ground before bursting forward with Jin riding on his back at incredible speed. Charging through the trees, he spots a wolf feasting on its prey. The wolf throws back its head and lets out a furious roar. Still riding Rex, Jin draws his sword. His sweeping slash cleanly severs the wolf's head, sending blood spraying through the air. Rex races past the wolf's severed head without slowing down. A satisfied grin spreads across his face as he lets out a pleased sigh. Wrapping his arms around Rex's neck, he laughs that he's adorable, realizing the super strength monster core made Rex far more useful than he had expected. Patting him affectionately, he praises him with a warm, "Good boy." Still stroking his neck, he says Rex can definitely pull his own weight and decides to bring him along on the next expedition. Standing beside Rex, he says the only thing left is the monster core from the masked man Bo fought. Holding the glowing monster core in his hand, he looks forward to seeing what reward it will bring. He bites into it, wondering what kind of skill he'll gain this time. Sometime later, the expedition leaves the city. The knights march forward in silence. Standing beside the towering Rex, he quietly looks ahead. He and Rex join the second expeditionary force as it's revealed that the expedition consists of 8,000 troops. He notes that the Reventer family, once royalty, poured most of their fortune into funding the expedition and allocated no small amount of resources to it. Surveying the assembled force, he observes that despite the enormous investment, many of the troops are poorly trained mercenaries. Imagining the demonic realm, he realizes that if these soldiers enter in their current state, most of them will die. Remembering Bo's warning, he concludes that the Order of Harmony's support forces are the expedition's only truly reliable members. His gaze settles on the Saintess and the Supreme Commander. He then counts 6 priests and 4 monks before estimating that the army's core strength includes about 8 knights. Jin suddenly pauses as something catches his attention. Glancing to the side, he remembers that 6 knights were supposedly sent to the front lines, meaning there should only be 2 knights left in the camp, not 3. His suspicion immediately shifts as he wonders if one of them could be a dark priest. Noticing the violin case carried by one of the knights, he quickly dismisses the thought. Staring at the disguised knight, he recognizes him as Roland. Approaching in disbelief, Jin asks why Roland decided to join the expedition, but the disguised knight awkwardly insists he has the wrong person. Ignoring the denial, he bluntly points out that anyone can tell he's Roland, prompting Roland to quietly tell him to keep his voice down. Their conversation is interrupted when the Supreme Commander notices Roland and asks what he's doing there. Recognizing him, Supreme Commander Cornelius questions why he ignored the Order Alliance's decision, barring him from participating in the expedition. Roland awkwardly removes his helmet after being recognized. With an embarrassed grin, he struggles to explain himself. Pulling Jin aside, he sighs that he nearly died from listening to everyone nagging him. When Jin asks what kind of situation this is, Roland admits that the Order Alliance forbade him from joining the expedition, so he secretly slipped into the Force anyway. Completely confused, Jin asks why he would risk doing something like that. Pointing at him, Roland excitedly declares that he wanted to witness Jin's battles with his own eyes, saying everyone talks about how he defeated multiple dark priests by himself. Patting Rex with admiration, he adds that he also wanted to see the famous beast in person, so there was no way he could simply stay behind. Crossing his arms, Jin warns that he could lose his life on this expedition, but Roland casually shrugs it off, saying the worst thing that could happen is dying. Jin stares at him in disbelief, realizing the man is even crazier than he first thought. Roland cheerfully admits he was itching for some real action. Placing the violin on the ground, he explains that he once devoted himself to music for the sake of peace, but hearing the stories about Jin inspired him to become stronger, so he's putting music aside for now. Pointing confidently at Jin, he declares that from this day forward, his goal is to witness Jin's strength with his own eyes, grow just as powerful, and one day use that strength to protect peace. His words leave Jin silently reflecting on the idea of fighting to protect others. As Roland continues speaking, he remarks that while some people fight for their own desires and others fight for peace, the reason someone fights matters far less than having the resolve to risk their life in battle. Walking in front of Jin, he remarks that in the end, every battle has only 2 possible outcomes. Either you survive or you die. Jin suddenly senses something approaching and snaps his attention toward the sky. A flock of winged monsters swoops down from above, and he instantly realizes they're gargoyles. One of the gargoyles crashes into the soldiers, pinning a knight beneath its body before letting out a savage roar. Its description reveals that it uses the weight increase ability to make its body even heavier. Watching Roland flinch at the sight, Jin admits that someone like Roland is hard not to root for. A fierce grin spreads across his face as he reminds himself that he's still human after all. Drawing his blade, he decides to lead the expedition to success. Purple energy begins flowing from his forehead as he activates the skill inherited from the monster core. With Mind's Eye activated, purple energy engulfs both his body and sword as he surges forward. Closing the distance in an instant, he aims directly for the gargoyle's glowing monster core. His sword pierces it cleanly, sending blood spraying from the impact. The gargoyle lets out a deafening roar as his blade remains buried in its monster core. With a single motion, he tears the monster core free. Watching the attack, the stunned knights exclaim that he destroyed a monster core in a single strike and call him completely insane. Standing with the gargoyle's monster core resting on his sword, Jin calls out to Roland, reminding him that he had just declared his goal was to surpass him. Looking at the stunned Roland, he tells him that reaching his level won't be easy. Biting into the monster core, he adds that if Roland wants to become as strong as him, being normally crazy won't be enough. His foot slammed into the ground as he charged straight at the monster core and drove his sword deep into it. Using Mind's Eye, Jin recognized it as the same ability the bow had used, though he admitted he still couldn't peer into mental worlds. Even so, he grinned and said that thanks to that improvement, sensing mana had become much easier. His sword carved deeper through the gargoyle's body before lodging in its core, and with one powerful pull, he violently ripped the monster core free. He said Mind's Eye let him pinpoint a monster core instantly, making it much safer and easier to hunt them down than before. Landing on the ground, he calmly said, "All right, starting now." As he bit into the monster core, he declared, "It's mukbang time." As the remaining gargoyles retreated into the sky, Jin calmly continued eating the monster core. Soon, night fell over the expedition camp. Roland walked toward Jin's tent. Pulling open the tent flap, he invited Jin to dinner, but Jin calmly replied that he was fine. Holding up the monster core, he smiled and said he was already full from eating so many of them. Watching Jin eat them, Roland wondered if consuming monster cores was really the secret behind his strength, since it was the first time he had witnessed someone do it. That thought made him wonder whether it was really okay to eat monster cores like that, and whether he should try one himself. He immediately punched himself in the face. Snapping back to reality, Roland panicked and reminded himself that eating a monster core would turn him into an abomination. Watching Jin casually eat more monster cores, he reminded himself that he couldn't copy a madman like him, yet couldn't help wondering why Jin still seemed as crazy as ever. After wiping his mouth, Jin said there was something more important to discuss. He asked about the expedition's casualties, and Roland began answering that, as Jin had probably already seen, the situation was disastrous. Rows of bodies covered with white sheets filled the camp as Roland revealed that, out of the expedition's 8,000 members, more than 600 had already been killed or injured. Hearing that number, Jin realized that if they kept losing 600 people every day, the expedition wouldn't even survive 10 days. Reflecting on the situation, he wondered if going all out would have changed anything, but concluded it would have only reduced the immediate casualties. Seeing the grieving survivors surrounded by the fallen, he realized he couldn't recklessly exhaust all his strength because no one knew what tomorrow would bring. He reminded himself that survival in the demonic realm depended on strict calculation rather than emotion, and that it was the only way to make the expedition succeed. Roland admitted he had expected heavy losses, but seeing so many people die from the very beginning was still deeply worrying. By the time they reached their destination, he wondered how many of them would still be alive. Jin asked what the higher-ups were planning to do, believing the expedition should regroup after suffering such heavy losses. With a sigh, Roland revealed that the order was to continue marching north without making any changes to the schedule. Surprised by the decision, Jin pointed out that while supplies might be sufficient, the soldiers' morale had surely collapsed. Roland then asked what they could possibly do now. He explained that delaying the expedition would cost both time and money, so the higher-ups had decided that wasting time there would be an even greater loss. After a brief pause, he revealed there was another reason behind the decision. As several senior leaders walked through the camp, he remarked that their opinions wouldn't change anything anyway. Edwin silently looked around. The expedition resumed its march as long lines of soldiers continued advancing through the forest. Riding atop Rex, Jin continued moving forward with the expedition. The deeper the expedition pushed into the demonic realm, the stronger the monsters became. As terrifying creatures overwhelmed the soldiers, the casualties spiraled out of control, yet the expedition refused to stop marching. One day turned into two, and before anyone realized it, 15 days had already passed. Edwin suddenly came to a halt after spotting something ahead. Staring in disbelief, he realized it was the monument marking the Ravender kingdom. He reached out to the ancient monument and quietly said, "Ancestors?" Embracing the monument, he declared that he had finally stepped onto his ancestors' homeland for the first time. The Supreme Commander excitedly announced that their destination was finally right in front of them and ordered everyone to keep marching. Instead of celebrating, he noticed the soldiers' lifeless expressions and quietly wondered why the atmosphere felt so heavy. Walking beside the commander, Roland reported that the soldiers' morale had dropped severely, prompting the commander to ask why when their destination was just ahead. Looking troubled, Roland warned that the accumulated losses were simply too severe, and without time to regroup, people's trust in the Order Alliance would only continue to crumble. He reported that only 5,432 troops remained, while the estimated death toll had already reached 2,500. The commander scoffed at the idea of trust and bluntly questioned what that even had to do with the situation. Still walking, Cornelius argued that while the Alliance soldiers might have been forced into the expedition, the mercenaries had joined of their own free will. Looking at the mercenaries ahead, he questioned why they were acting this way when everyone had been promised a fitting reward and their destination was just around the corner. Furious, he shouted at the exhausted troops to stop whining and keep marching. The soldiers stiffened at his words as he warned that anyone who reacted like this again would be punished under military law. Watching the scene unfold, Jin quietly remarked that Cornelius was being completely unreasonable. He suddenly paused and glanced toward a nearby tree after sensing something unusual. Dropping into a crouch, he warned that they couldn't march any farther. Glancing at Jin, Cornelius recognized him as the man who ate monster cores and demanded to know what he was talking about. Keeping his eyes on the tree, Jin warned that the land ahead belonged to the Knoll tribe. He added that if they continued marching through this area, without warning, a Knoll raised its axe and hurled it down toward Jin. But in one swift motion, he drew his sword from its sheath and blocked the incoming attack, sending sparks flying on impact. As more shadowy figures emerged from the forest, he warned that clashing with the Knolls was unavoidable. The Knolls were highly intelligent, monsters that built massive societies and would fight any species they marked as an enemy until it was driven to extinction. Edwin silently stared toward the danger ahead, his expression growing grim. Roland freezes in shock as he recognizes the Knolls, admitting he'd only read about them in books and never expected to encounter them here. The snarling Knolls close in with weapons in hand. Facing the encroaching Knolls, Cornelius stares in disbelief that they actually ran into them here. Questioning Jin's warning, he argues that saying a clash with the Knolls is unavoidable is just stating the obvious. With a grim expression, Cornelius argues that they came here for one reason: to fight and kill monsters. Jin immediately rejects that thinking, insisting he's wrong. Locking eyes with Cornelius, he declares that the Expeditionary Force's goal isn't simply to fight, it's to win. He warns that if they keep fighting here, the Expeditionary Force won't just fail, it will suffer something even worse. With alarm spreading across his face, Cornelius hears Jin warn that humanity itself will gain an eternal enemy. Realizing the mercenary is right, the soldiers fear this won't end with only their deaths, and some desperately wonder if they should forget the gold and run. Grinding his teeth, Cornelius silently curses the panicked soldiers. Without hesitation, Cornelius grabs a soldier's spear. With a furious glare, he roars that, when he orders them to fight, they fight. No more complaints. Before anyone can respond, Cornelius hurls the spear straight at the Knoll. Grimacing, Jin mutters, "Damn, that crazy bastard!" The spear drives straight through a Knoll, pinning it to a tree as the others freeze in shock. One Knoll bares its fangs, but its eye suddenly widens, turning pitch black. Throwing back its head, the Knoll lets out a deafening roar. More Knolls surge forward, answering with furious roars. Packs of Knolls launch a full assault, charging straight toward Cornelius. Refusing to back down, Cornelius roars for everyone to fight and declares that today they will reclaim the Reventer Kingdom. Cursing under his breath, Roland readies himself for battle. The battlefield instantly erupts into chaos as soldiers and Knolls collide in a brutal clash. A Knoll's blade slashes into a soldier as another soldier drives his spear into a charging Knoll's chest, while another Knoll crashes its axe against a soldier's spear, leaving the soldier's eyes wide with shock. Cornelius drives his weapon through a Knoll, cutting it down as a fierce grin spreads across his face. Watching from nearby, Jin realizes the lunatic has finally gone and done it. Realizing the situation has spiraled out of control, Jin curses under his breath. Knowing he can no longer hold back, he decides it's finally time to unleash his own power. The moment Jin releases his aura, a charging Knoll freezes in its tracks. A terrifying wave of crimson energy erupts outward, sweeping across the entire battlefield. The sudden pressure leaves even the Knolls visibly shaken. Feeling the overwhelming aura, Roland stares in disbelief and wonders what kind of pressure this is. Jin stands calmly amid the crimson aura as Roland declares he's a true prodigy. From that moment on, Jin coldly declares that nobody is allowed to move. As crimson energy surrounds everyone, he warns that the instant anyone moves, whether monster or human, he'll kill every last one of them. The Knolls freeze in place, stunned by the terrifying threat. Even the Knoll leader breaks into a nervous sweat. For a brief moment, the battlefield falls completely silent. Crimson energy continues to ripple around Jin as he stands perfectly still, keeping everyone locked in place. Cornelius glares at him in disbelief and demands to know what the hell he's doing. He angrily argues that if he possesses that kind of power, he should be using it to kill the monsters instead of threatening humans. Cornelius reminds him that they spared his life for this very purpose, questioning whether this is how he intends to repay them. Cornelius flinches as a spike of crimson energy erupts at his feet. Without changing his cold expression, Jin repeats that he said not to move. Cornelius, drenched in cold sweat, nervously wonders whether the strange word Jin just uttered is some kind of curse. Facing him, Jin calmly explains that he isn't doing this for his own sake, and reminds the commander that he already warned them fighting here would ignite a full-scale war between the Knolls and the humans. Cornelius's face tightens with frustration as Jin says he rushed in without any plan, leaving him no choice but to step in. When Cornelius angrily asks if that means they should simply retreat, Jin raises a hand and tells him to at least hear him out before jumping to conclusions. He explains that the Knolls are highly intelligent creatures, so the first thing they should do is try talking to them. Cornelius can only stare at him in disbelief, questioning whether he's seriously suggesting they negotiate with monsters. Just then, a nearby Knoll's growl catches Jin's attention before it cautiously calls him brother. Jin's expression softens into a faint smile before he greets Bracknock, saying it's been a long time since they last saw each other. Watching the exchange, Roland is left speechless, wondering how Jin is actually talking to a monster. Standing face to face, Jin and Bracknock begin talking. The scene then shifts to a massive fortress. A Knoll urgently asks for a report, only to hear that they have 10 days at most before facing total annihilation. The messenger pleads with their queen to find a solution before it's too late. Standing silently, the Knoll queen, Nartash, blames herself, admitting she has been truly irresponsible in such a critical situation. She admits that instead of thinking of a solution, the first person who comes to mind is Jin. Beyond the fortress walls, a horde of monsters continues gathering outside the city. Jin reflects that what defines a person begins with the people around them as he sits alone in the forest. He then questions what could possibly define him in a place where not a single other person exists. The only thing the demonic realm had defined him as was a lump of flesh capable of feeling nothing but pain. He remembers being left in pain and loneliness, with nothing around him but the forest. Yet looking back, he recalls that there were beings who managed to pique his interest. Those beings were the Knolls, and he spots a group of them carrying a large snake through the forest. They weren't as advanced as humans, but the Knolls still had their own language and tools. For someone as isolated as him, their way of life was fascinating. He wanted to befriend the Knolls, so he approaches one and tries to greet it with a simple, "Hello?" But it only stares back at him in silence. Instead of responding, the creature suddenly snarls, clearly treating Jin as some strange beast, and making contact with them proves far from easy. It then attacks, striking him hard enough to send him reeling, but he refuses to give up. The next day, the creature is shocked to see him still alive and attacks again. A day later, he tries communicating with the Knolls once more, but it immediately swings its weapon at him. On his next attempt, Jin simply greets it with a cheerful, "Hello?" The Knoll stares at him in fear, realizing that despite having his neck half severed, he has appeared again. Watching it continue to growl, he wonders if it is actually trying to communicate with him and decides to imitate the sound. His strange attempt only leaves the creature staring at him in confusion. The Knoll suddenly charges at him, angrily demanding to know how he dares insult its family. After countless attempts and plenty of fighting, Jin and the Knolls eventually become family. Looking back, the Knoll Queen explains that at first, no matter how many times they severed his neck, he kept coming back, so they assumed he was simply a monster with that ability. She admits that he has become a tremendous help to their people. Looking over the battlefield, she thanks him, saying they were able to win the war because of him. Even so, Jin is preparing to leave, and Nartash asks if he really has to go. She offers to honor him as a hero for the rest of his life if he chooses to stay, but he apologizes and says there is something he must find, prompting her to ask if he plans to search for his own kind. Jin turns away with a faint smile, leaving his answer unstated. Nartash apologizes for not being able to help him, explaining that humans have only existed in their legends and that he is the first one they have ever seen in person. Jin simply tells them it's okay. Judging by the machete and mercenary insignia, he realizes there have to be other humans somewhere. A little Knoll suddenly reaches out and grabs his cloak. He tells Jin that if things ever get difficult, he can come back anytime. Crying, Braknak promises that one day he'll grow strong enough to protect his brother. Jin gives him a small smile and agrees, calling him a little one. Back in the present, Jin stands in front of Braknak. He lets out a strained groan as the effects of the skill wear off. Despite using his skill, he realizes that he didn't pass out this time. Since he only used it briefly, he wonders if all the monster cores he has eaten lately have something to do with it. Braknak asks how long it has been, and how Jin recognized him so quickly. He replies that it wasn't hard, since Braknak is the spitting image of his younger self. Jin points out that Braknak's defining traits are his snaggletooth and distinctive hair color, making him instantly recognizable. Braknak blushes at the compliment, but then suddenly hits him. Wiping his mouth, Jin asks why the Knolls have come so far south when their territory lies much farther north. Braknak hesitates before admitting that something has changed since Jin left. He explains that the ancient beings have become more active, forcing their people to move south. Jin's expression turns serious as he repeats the unfamiliar term and thinks about these ancient beings. Before the conversation can continue, Cornelius calls out to him. He looks directly at Jin and demands to know what he and the Knoll are talking about. Jin calmly exhales, then calls Braknak by name. She turns toward him with a questioning look. He casually asks her to make a scary face for him, leaving her puzzled by the strange request. Braknak takes the request seriously and bares her fangs, producing a genuinely intimidating expression. The humans are stunned by her terrifying expression, with Cornelius shouting, "What is that expression?" Before asking, "Is this a fight?" Standing between them, Jin urgently tries to calm everyone down, warning that if a fight breaks out now, there will be no further negotiations. Cornelius questions the idea of negotiations, while he explains that the Knolls are furious because the humans entered their territory. He reveals that the situation is even more serious. The Knolls have declared war on humanity, with reinforcements several times larger than the current group on their way. Cornelius is left shocked. Jin's expression turns serious as he considers what that would mean. He warns that if the reinforcements arrive, the expeditionary force will be wiped out, leaving Cornelius visibly tense. The soldiers panic at the news, pointing out that they already suffered heavy losses in the last battle and cannot handle another one right now. Cornelius turns to him and asks if what he is saying is really true. Jin remains silent for a moment, admitting to himself that he made it up before immediately confirming, "Yes." It's true. Bracknock asks what he just said, but Jin simply tells her not to worry and that he'll handle it. He makes it clear that he doesn't want the gnolls and humans to fight, because this battle can only end in destruction. The problem is the expeditionary force. With a single word from him, the gnolls will stop fighting regardless of the situation. However, the expeditionary force still needs to convince their stubborn commander to stop the fighting, and that won't be easy. Since no one else can communicate with the gnolls, Jin declares that he's the only one who can stop this fight. Just then, Edwin Reventer steps forward and asks, "More troops are coming here?" He considers the arrival of more troops a troubling prospect, especially with the situation already so unstable. He points out that negotiations only work when both sides have something the other side needs. Looking unconvinced, Edwin questions what the gnolls could possibly want from the humans that would make them willing to negotiate. Jin quietly begins to explain what they want, his eyes narrowing. He steps forward and declares, "Interaction between gnolls and humans." Edwin is left visibly stunned by the idea, while Cornelius reacts in disbelief, clearly struggling to process what he's hearing. He draws his sword and dismisses the idea of humans and monsters interacting, calling the whole situation absurd. Cornelius places his sword against Jin's neck and asks if he really takes them for such fools. He angrily questions whether something this ridiculous could possibly make sense. Jin remains composed and points out that whether it makes sense or not, Cornelius has no choice in the matter. Rex looms over Cornelius and bares its fangs menacingly as Jin asks what he can actually do about it.